All right, 5-second warning. All right, we'll call this general committee meeting to order. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here this evening. We start our meetings with the following land acknowledgement. We respectfully acknowledge that we are on the treaty and traditional territory of the Mississauga Anishinaabe. We offer our gratitude to the First Peoples for their care for and teachings about our earth and our relations. May we honor those teachings. We'll now take 30 seconds to reflect. Please stand for the singing of the national anthem. And the Council for the City of Peterborough recognizes the principles contained in our Constitution and the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. All right, I'll now hand it over to Mayor Leal for Remembrance Day remarks.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. The 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month in 1918, the armistice was signed to complete what would be the war to end all wars. We do know that some 20 years later, World War II broke out. 8 years after that, the Korean War broke out. And Canadian Armed Forces, of course, have been involved in peacekeeping missions in 1956 in Suez, which separate the combatants, as sadly we're now seeing in Gaza. We had our men and women, brave men and women in Afghanistan, Kosovo, and they still go in many missions around the world. This Saturday, we'll gather across the street and remind our citizens that the cenotaph in Peterborough is one of the most remarkable cenotaphs in Canada today. The architect, Walter Allward, was the same individual that designed the Vimy Ridge Memorial. And over the years, the great work of one David Edgerton with the Veterans Wall of Honor over there today, the opportunity to see the names of the men and women that are engraved in those stones across the street. Each one of those names has a story behind it. We should all take the time on Saturday to go over, be there at 11 o'clock in the morning for the service that will take place, but take a quiet moment after that just to look at the names. And remember that the only way that we serve in the offices that we hold today is because of those names across the street. During my time in public life, I had the opportunity to visit 2 Canadian war cemeteries. In July of 2013, my son Braden and I were guests of the Hastings and Prince Edward Regiment to celebrate the 70th anniversary of Operation Husky, the landing of the 1st Canadian Division in Sicily. It was the opportunity for my son and I, along with a few remaining veterans from that campaign, to tour every inch of Sicily to see the battlegrounds where those individuals were. It culminated in a place called Agira. At Agira, there's 450 young Canadians buried. And let me tell you, there's nothing more moving than when you go to those and see those stone grave markings there with the maple leaf on it. Look at the names and look at the ages. And then in 2015, I had the opportunity to be in Hong Kong to lay a wreath at the British Commonwealth Cemetery that's there. I had the opportunity to see the gravesite of one Frank Whalen, who was the uncle of a former city councilor right here in Peterborough, Dan McWilliams. Again, a very moving experience to be there. And one of the things that I always thought, governments of all governments, we spend a lot of money on a lot of programs and a lot of activities. And I always thought it would be great if every young Canadian would get an opportunity in their lifetime to visit one of those war cemeteries around the world. It's an experience that you never forget. So on behalf of the citizens of Peterborough and this council, we look forward to seeing a large number of citizens in this community joining with us on Saturday across the road to pay our respects to what Tom Brokaw once described, the famous NBC newsman, is the greatest generation ever. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mayor Leal, for that. Adoption of minutes, September 25th, October 2nd, October 10th. And I can have a mover, Councillor DeGay. Any comments or questions? We'll take a vote. And that is carried. Thanks, everyone. We have one item coming out of closed session this evening. Two items coming out of closed session this evening. So just hold on one second. Apologies. Apologies. First item, negotiations. That council approve the recommendation outlined in report CAOPC 23-008 dated November 6, 2023 of the Chief Administrative Officer as follows. That respecting the collective bargaining process, council directs staff to proceed as outlined in closed session report CAOPC 23-008 dated November 6, 2023 of the Chief Administrative Officer. Moved by Mayor Leal. Any comments or questions? We'll take a vote. I think Councillor Reel, we're just waiting on your vote. That's all right. And that is carried. Second item coming out of closed. Whereas council has established municipal standards that prevent encampments on city property except pursuant to a permit And whereas council considers it appropriate to maintain such standards, but pursuant to bylaw 23-090, resolved to temporarily amend them to the extent of delegating to the city's commissioner, community services, the authority to establish a temporary encampment within the land comprising approximately 0.07 acre of the southeast corner of Elmer and Wolf Street, subject to conditions to be determined by the said commissioner and for a period ending November 15th, 2023. And whereas it is advisable to extend such period to January 5th, 2024, now therefore be it resolved, one, that bylaw 23-090 be amended by deleting from its paragraph 2.b the text November 15th, 2023, and by substituting the text January 5th, 2024, and two, that the amending bylaw be passed by council at a special open meeting of council on Monday, May 6th, 2023. Repeat, Monday, November 6th, 2023, tonight. Moved by Councillor Riel. Any comments or questions? We will take a vote. And that is carried. Thanks, everyone. Mr. Clerk, any disclosure of pecuniary interest this evening?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I see none at this time.
All right, we'll move to our consent agenda. Committee members, let me know if you'd like to speak to any of the following items. 14A1, responsibilities of the Chief Administrative Officer. Anyone wishing to speak to that? Councillor Riel and Mayor Leal. 14A2, inspection bylaw. Anyone wishing to speak to that? Councillor Hakey and Burke. 14A3, addition resolution for age-friendly Peterborough Community Action Plan. Anyone wishing to speak to that? Seeing none. All right, so we have one item for consent this evening, 14A3, moved by Councillor Vasiliadis. We'll take a vote. And that is carried. We have two presentations this evening. Our first presentation, multi-use sport and event center update to feasibility study. And I believe Commissioner Laidman, you want to make a few brief introductory comments?
Sure. Thanks, Chair Beamer. So I did want to introduce John Hack from Sierra Planning and Management. His firm has undertaken a number of studies related to this project over the last couple of years. Council at a previous meeting did request that an updated feasibility study be undertaken, which is the report in front of you tonight. Mr. Hack and his team have undertaken to update that feasibility study of the importance of and the rationale behind a new multi-use sport and event center, including an evaluation of the Memorial Center and the possibilities of it being expanded and renovated. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Hack.
Mr. Hack, welcome.
Start again. Good evening, Mr. Chair, Mayor, members of Council. Happy to be back and to give you an update. So this is, as Sheldon had indicated, an update to a lot of the work that's been going on over the last few years. So my name is John Hack, and I'm with Sierra Planning and Management, and I'm joined here this evening by my colleague Richard Davros, who's an architect with Juan Gregerson Davros Architects. So we have a big slide deck, but we have 15 minutes, so we're going to do our best to stick within that. I guess it starts with understanding how to use the Okay, and then use the arrows. Perfect. Thank you. So as advertised, what we're doing is to give you a quick update. There is a need. We haven't been back in front of council on this file since November of 2020. So this is obviously a new council. But there is some consistency. We've been in front of 3 councils now in terms of the reporting on this. So I think a bit of an update. We'll get into what this update is about and the conclusions from it, and then we'll be happy to answer questions on it. So in terms of the potted history of this, there really are 3 phases. We're in the 3rd phase of work, even though that's been on hiatus for, a couple of years essentially, and there are reasons for that. The first phase back in 2018 was really to ask that question that you see on the screen. Is the PMC, is the Peterborough Memorial Centre worth reinvesting as the city's sport and entertainment centre? So that's not a pejorative comment against the PMC as a building with history and a future to it, but it is specifically in regard to whether or not it's going to meet the test of being a modern sport and entertainment centre that is a justification for the scale of investment that would be required. So that was the first phase. The answer to that was no, it is not. Phase 2 happened immediately thereafter and was a very full analysis of feasibility as well as a locational sweep to come up with various locations. The conclusion of that was a concept around sort of 5,500 seats to 5,800 seats. That's pretty variable, but a new facility, a preference for downtown, and work to be done in phase 3 on this. And council gave the green light to that. So with that, we then started to look at 2 particular sites, Morrow Park, this predates the decision to put the twin pad and pool there. So there was a little bit more land available. So we went through that exercise, and also a potential assembly of lands in around Market Plaza, Townsend, that area that's been busy with infrastructure work. So we went through a lot of detail with those, and there was another site in downtown as well. And the message from phase 3 was, yes, downtown is going to be complicated, but there is some real value and economic benefits. So the link really was to the urban regeneration. And as a planner, I can tell you that what we've advised, and it relates to the financing for any of these kinds of projects, is you need to make it more than just about sports. So it has to be a generational project that's part of downtown regeneration. So that's where we were. And then obviously council had to focus on the community paths, for example. That was an important project. But what has changed that we need to take on board in coming back and looking at this? Well, obviously the Morrow Park Community Centre is under construction, and that took out of the realm of necessity of building a second pad linked to a new sport and event centre. So that gives us a bit more freedom and a lot more maneuverability to position a single pad facility in downtown potentially. I don't need to speak to the implications of the pandemic, but that's obviously, it raises questions about, are we still in the same economic circumstance as we were before as it relates to people's propensity to visit arenas and to undertake these activities? And you'll see the answer, I think, is pretty much yes. The other aspect was significant escalation in construction costs. I don't have to tell members of council here on any number of projects that's been an issue. And so it really sparked the question, even though we had answered it in 2018, which is PMC is not the right venue for putting wholesale reinvestment to try and make it the next, the building that you need for the next 50 years. I think it did behoove us to look back at it. So Richard's work, which he'll explain tonight, is exactly that, to look at whether or not that is worthwhile. And so there's 2 parts to this, and we'll get into them now. Beforehand, I just wanted to, the report you had, the memo report, if you came at this and you hadn't looked at the file for 3 years, you sort of just need a little bit of a brief on what these buildings are. So just to give you just some slides, a multi-use sport and event center means a lot of different things to different people. The one thing it's not, and if I can just sort of be counterintuitive for a minute, it's not an arena. There's an ice sheet in the middle of it and you can play hockey in there, but it's not an arena in the sense of it is a different building type, different form, different function, different operational mandate. And governance structure. And as you see in the picture, if you want it to be a lake, it can be a lake. And that's the boat show. That's down in Toronto from a few years ago. But just to give you a sense of it, there are things that have to happen which are going to raise the price tag. This is why these buildings tend to be as expensive as they are. It's about being able to host any number of activities, and so the strength of the building is a vital factor. Its ability to rapidly change from sports to family events to dirt events where you're bringing in rodeo animals, whatever it might be, as well as a range of other sort of trade shows. That's important. It can be obviously not just for franchised hockey. It can be something that you bring to the city in terms of major events. There's one, I think, from Windsor, for example, where they put a pool in there, and so on and so forth. But it does come with the price tag of having to have the design in place, floor to ceiling height. All of these things have to be very different from an arena. Some configurations there you can have. This is a two-pad model for an event center. So just in your mind's eye, just remove that second pad. It's still an opportunity, but it's not necessarily a requirement at this point if needs have been met through the new community pad. But you can see how it can be configured. Some examples. This is a lovely facility down in St. Catharines, the Meridian Center. Great floor to ceiling height. The boards can be pulled away, the seats can be telescoped back, and you have enormous space opportunities. You can see there just what we're talking about. And it's downtown. That's an old brownfield. You walk across the Pedway and then you're in downtown. So it's all part of that amalgam of opportunities that are more than just sport and entertainment. There it is again. Leon Center in Kingston, don't really need to speak too much about that. That is downtown as well. So to the Tribute Community Center in Oshawa, again, a great building. And then this one of my favorites is that we worked on this is the Avenir Center in Moncton, which is a really interesting story of how you can regenerate downtown with these projects. Okay, just very quickly, just to go through what you may have read in the report. We address market area, population, spending capacity. It's a little bit dry, that stuff, but again, what we've done is really we're putting checks against the feasibility study we had put together, and then we'll be able to, hopefully with council approval, move on to reconsidering the design. When I say that, but making sure it fits within a downtown site, reconfirming scale, capital cost, and things of that nature. So on the trade area growth, things have changed a little bit. The 115 and the 407 makes a big difference. You can see down there, if you look at the area where we've put our little elliptical, that adds a significant amount of population within 50 minutes because of the amount of people that are residing and the growth happening in Whitby, Oshawa, and North Pickering as well. So the trade area is still as significant as it was. It's had about a 10% growth, which again is what we're seeing around the GTA outside of Toronto. And then with the boundaries that have increased, if you believe 50 minutes is a reasonable drive time, and I think it is for certain events, not for every event, but for those events that are going to put bums in seats to watch events. You've got over 400,000 people within a drive time. In terms of the events that have happened, I think kudos to the city and management and being able to plan their way through the pandemic, do the work that was necessary on capital upgrades, and then move on to hosting events. And you can see there, just in the beige there, that 2018 and 19, and then the comparison with 2022, strong rebound of the events and a strong events market. So we're very satisfied with that. In terms of attendance, don't concern yourselves too much with the numbers. Those numbers are mid-pack in the OHL, very good for the Lakers. But what we're really looking at is, and we've said this in previous discussions with council, is as it relates to things like seat count and what you need to do in the events market, don't think about 2018 or now in our case 2023. Think about 2033, 2038, 2040, because that is what you're building toward. And if you look at that, the those numbers are going to change up as people, as long as the product on the ice and in terms of the Lakers and other such activities is there, you're going to see an increase in the demand for seats. And so, it's always a design question as to how many seats you put in a building, but I don't think anything has changed that would tell us that you need to go less than 5,500 seats. So it will become a design and cost question for us going forward. And then financials, very much consistent with what they were before. That deficit might look large for these kinds of venues. It's really not large at all. And I say that, not to be flippant about taxpayer support for that, but that is just a reality. It's not a huge number. It's a good number. We would anticipate a new facility would obviously do better than that, however. Okay, on to part B, which is the question then we wanted to make sure that we looked at, because costs have escalated so much for new facilities, could the PMC be renovated to an equivalence? And I think I need to just sort of bring you into the theory of what we're doing here. We were not asking the question, could you go in and just generally renovate the PMC? Because the answer is, yes, you could. You could improve it. You could spruce it up. The question here is it worth putting in money on the assumption that it is going to be a building for the next 50 years and is going to operate to an equivalency with those facilities that I just showed you on screen a moment ago? That's what Richard has been looking at in terms of what he's looking at. The other thing to recognize is that even if you didn't do anything, there's about a $20 million deferred maintenance or capital expenditure that's required on that building over the next, I think over the next sort of 15 years. So it's not as if it's pressing. But the message here is, as you can see on screen there, the cost of doing nothing is not nothing. There is going to be costs involved one way or the other. So it is investing in further planning for this facility is a proactive move. It was in 2018. It remains so in 2023. So with that, I'll introduce Richard, and maybe you can just run through some of these slides.
Thanks. So this is a diagram done in the previous report that shows the circulation pinch points. And I think everybody here is aware that access up and down from the stands is very, very tight. The concessions can be extremely crowded. So that's a functional issue that when we were engaged back in August and September, tried to look at to see if it could be addressed. Another diagram just showing location utility. Again, a picture on the right-hand side showing congestion. So one of the primary things we looked at was adding 1,000 seats plus or minus. And we sort of proved that, well, you can add 1,000 seats, but how does it really work out? So this diagram shows an opening up of the ground floor space. I have to say that most modern facilities have a continuous concourse. You don't have a continuous concourse, and that's a real functional flaw in the building. That affects circulation, affects modern concessions. Most modern event centers, arenas, have far more sophisticated concessions and food service opportunities than just a concession. This shows the blue, and this shows adding escalators, but it comes at the expense of some existing space on the ground floor. So this is the upper level. Now, this is a small addition at the back over top of where the ice plant is and everything. So it would mean relocating the chillers. It helps with circulation, but there's still the constraint of the suites and boxes that really pinches the circulation. Okay, additional seating. So the building is a little bit limited in its footprint. It's bounded by 2 streets. There can be an expansion out over the ice plant, and we could expand within the building footprint more or less on the sides. And this adds roughly, well, it says 1,300, but it's 1,200 or seats, or a little bit less once you add in new washrooms. Going straight up with the rake of seats on the sides comes at the expense of limiting or eliminating the suites and boxes. That didn't seem like a terribly practical solution. Coming and building over top of the boxes and suites, you can do it, but it came at the expense of sight lines. The people at the top of the seats would not be able to see the far side of the ice. So that doesn't really make a lot of sense. The solution to have additional seats and still be able to see the ice comes with the cost of raising the roof. Now, that adding the seats is a significant addition, and it comes with a lot of effects, complying with modern codes, building seats. Raising the roof just exacerbates that beyond belief. By raising the roof, the entire building has to be designed to current seismic loads, current accessibility standards, current energy envelopes, so that's the outer skin insulation standards. And it just doesn't stop. We're adding 1,000 seats or 1,200 seats. Well, the requirement for washrooms increases exponentially within a tight footprint. We already have issues with circulation. So how does that really work out? And further, I don't know if we have this here. Right now, according to what you would use for parking standards per seat or per 4 seats, the parking is undersized. And by adding another 1,200 seats, 1,000 seats, it sort of points or suggests that you have to add a parking structure, which becomes quite expensive. So I'll let John go back to the costs.
Okay, so just very quickly to end the presentation, as you can see, it's quite a project if you were to get into a renovation, and I don't think we've even taken care of the square corners and those diagrams as well. So, and that's just to give you an indication. So, 20 years ago, I think this year there was a renovation. It was about $20 million. Typically, we've seen these kinds of facilities go through. It's reasonable to renovate at one point in time. The question is, can you do it a second time? And we don't think so in terms of it being a value proposition. So, as it relates to the estimates of renovation cost, the market conditions evolve, in terms of putting these costs together, these are order of magnitude. There's volatility. So what's true today might not be true in a month's time. More importantly, though, when you're dealing with renovation, you are opening up walls, you're opening up existing spaces. I think we all know that runs certain risks, which can be mitigated. That's why you hire architects and engineers. But there's a lot of steps to get to that point where you can finally put the cost together. So, and the other thing to consider is that dealing with this building, it's not just a case of months. It is a significant period where the Petes and the Lakers would not be in this building. And there's a cost that's not included in these numbers. We're pretty optimistic. We're trying to be positive, but we've got to be clear about this. As it relates to the new, though, so I don't want to let the new build get off the hook too lightly as well. The $107 million is for the single pad option sort of concept designed in 2018, subject to a price escalator that we put in place in the summer, which is about 48%. So there's no land costs in here, for example. There's no other complications of brownfield cleanup and all those things that would need to go along. So don't look at that number and say that that's a fixed number. It will change. It will change, though, in a way which is described to council through this process that we want to get into from this point on. And that's part of the range of what we're calling phase 3B, which is the next piece. So the renovation costs, without getting into too much detail, they can be broken down, ranges are appropriate, and then contingencies are appropriate as well. So hard costs, soft costs, then contingencies, which as you design, those contingencies and percentage terms would come down and you get confirmation of the numbers. But I think the message from all of this is that, you're essentially looking at the cost of new build to go in and to do the renovations to a point where it's an equivalent building. So that does not speak to the future of the PMC in other capacities. other uses it could be put to, but it does speak to whether or not this would be equivalent to the Avenir Centre in Moncton, the latest and greatest that's going to be built in Sudbury in a few years, and so on and so forth. So that's the message there on that. The next steps that we would have in mind, subject to council agreement, would be to get back into looking at downtown sites. The official plan update that was a vital element that we were waiting for, and that's now in place. And so I think from a policy perspective, we can start to look at the regeneration capacities, and it speaks to how you would finance this building as well. So due diligence on sites, design analysis, and adjustment of the concept as required, certainly renewed capital costs, and development of a funding strategy. And then prospective site selection and acquisition would happen, only after we come back with further information and council's able to give instruction on how it wishes to proceed. So that's where I'll hand it back to you, Mr. Chair, and would be happy to take any questions.
Great. Thank you very much for that presentation. Really appreciate it. So we do have some questions of the speakers. I have Councillor Reel and Crowley and Burke. Councillor Reel?
Through the chair to the presenters, certainly I didn't see anywhere in your report here looking at a 3P model. You're looking at $100 and some million for just the municipality to carry the freight. In the other, the Meridian Center, the Leon Center, all of these, even the Tribute Center, were they all the municipality carried the funding of this here, or was it a 3P model? Both Councillor Baldwin and I had an opportunity to go to a meeting with the Petes and some of the other interested parties and talk about a new multi-use facility like this. Certainly the Petes were interested in a new building. And the question I asked the people that were there, how much are you willing to put in? There's no money in arenas. The money was in manual of actually administrating and running. And that piece of paper is still blank, waiting for their names to go on it. So is there anything in here about a 3P model? Because I think that's the only way the city of Peterborough would be able to even enter into something like this here, where we had a beneficiary or benefactor or somebody willing to put some money in here.
Thank you for the question through you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, this isn't the report to get into that level of detail, because we're just again proof of concept at this point. That's a delivery piece, and it's critical. And if you were to look at our remaining work plan that we have for what we're calling phase 3, it gets into exactly that, and it ties into the whole funding and financing question. The best way I can answer your question, just in the affirmative, that you are right. The P3 is a much sort of abused term. It can be many different things. The best way to perhaps describe it is your current community facility that's being designed. That's not a P3. That is a traditional design bid build. So the architects were hired, you're funding it, you're getting grants and so forth to fund it. There'll be whatever the funding arrangement is in terms of going to the taxpayers, then you own and you operate it. In this particular case, what would happen is once you get a site and you acquire that site, you can then focus on, we want this building, and you would effectively go out to a design build firstly. So you would have specifications, and then firms of contractors and designers would provide the building for a guaranteed maximum price. And you can do it a couple of ways. You could have them finance the building, and then you have to pay every year for 40 or 50 years for that. But financing has to be cheaper for you as a municipality than the private sector. That was generally the truth a few years ago. And then operations, they could take all the risk on the operations and pay the deficit, but then you've got a building that you're essentially giving as a concession. So normally there is an approach, which is you might bring in a third-party private sector management firm. So if you go to Oshawa, they have, I think it's Spectra that are doing the management there. The city operates its own facility here. So there are a myriad of questions that would get to those answers that you're looking for, but I can assure you that both the role of the private sector in building around the facility so that you can generate tax revenues that you could apply to the debenture that you would have to take, because although you want to get grants for this, and although you want to be able to use DCs to some extent, there's going to be some challenges in getting grants for pro sports. We know that. So the broader base of urban regeneration to lift the assessment, and that's what we had in Moncton. If you look at Moncton's example, so very much similar to Peterborough in terms of size, brownfield, downtown, contaminated land. They went through that. They put the facility there. It raised the assessment around. So you have hotels coming in, restaurants, other eateries, condominiums coming in, and it's the taxes generated on that, which if council has a mind to accept that as being generated by that, $100 million investment that you've put in, then it would fall that could be part of the financing as planned. But you're resting on the private sector to come forward and do that. So I think it's a great question and one we look forward to getting into.
The chair, a couple of the examples you had here outside of the Meridian Center, which I've been by, but never in. But certainly a month and a half ago, I was at the Tribute Center. I mean, the building didn't blow me away anyways. It had all kinds of faults, something similar to the PMC here with washrooms and certainly the convection areas and stuff like that. The only part that I liked is you come off the ground level and went down, which I like that kind of model. But I'm hearing there was also some sort of grief when they built the Leon Center and certainly Kingston. And I guess my question is, you're talking about building downtown. Then you have to be very selective where you're going to put this building. Is it in the proper place? There's no parking in Oshawa. You had to go around and try and find parking. And so certainly, I think one of the things is looking at that site, even though it might be downtown, is it conducive to the downtown and certainly meeting the needs of the people to come?
So thank you for the question again. And perfection is difficult. I hear you on the Tribute Center, and that's a 2006 build. And as you may recall from history, they tried to raise the roof of the old building, and that wasn't going to fly. And eventually they came in, and it was part of that downtown regeneration. Courthouse was going in there, and condominiums, and now. So there's a gestation period for a lot of this regeneration to happen. Kingston, you're absolutely right. They corkscrewed that one into that location by the causeway, but I think ultimately it will bear fruit in terms of renovating around. There's a no frills there, which isn't going anywhere, and I think one of those stores. And the same issue here is that you have uses that are going to remain. So we are cognizant of the complexity of putting a building in downtown and how you do it. I think we just need to sort of work collaboratively, and I think the city staff have all the capabilities to supply us with information we need on that. So.
Thank you very much, Councillor Real. I have Councillor Crowley, Burke, Duguay, and Mayor Leal. Councillor Crowley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So thank you very much for coming. The one question that I do have is, and I think you touched on it a bit, is with a new arena, there's a newfound excitement in the community, more people go out. How soon after do those numbers drop off? Are we talking 3 years, 5 years, where we're at the current rate of deficit yearly with the MEM Center? Would that?
Thank you for the question through you, Mr. Chair. I wish I could, boldly state what's going to happen, but I can't. But I appreciate the question, and I think everyone should understand there is a risk that's involved in this. There are some anecdotes. I was fortunate to work 23, 24 years ago on London's project that was to put a new 10,000 seat venue. The discussion at the time was you can't move from the highway where they had the ice house out by the 402 because there's nowhere to park in downtown. I think we and the staff planners and even council took the view that if you have a parking problem, that's a good thing, not a bad thing for this kind of facility. If you're dragging hockey equipment in there, I get it. It's not ideal, but there is just being semi-serious about parking is that there are solutions to parking. Even the picture we put up there with the parking garage on the PMC grounds, I doubt you would necessarily go forward with that. You'd find other solutions. But in terms of London's example there, if you get the right ownership group, and I'm not suggesting the piece would not be the right, they're a storied franchise. In the case of London, there was 4,000 people around that used to go to the games. When the new venue opened in downtown with all of those problems, it was 9,000, 9,500, and they haven't looked back since in terms of the opportunity. So they are obviously very well located. I wouldn't suggest that Peterborough is necessarily going to follow that. But if you dot the i's and cross the t's, I think with a new building, there's no reason to think you wouldn't be able to sustain a very positive experience that ties into arts and culture and the whole bailiwick.
Thank you very much. One more question. Well, maybe it's, I don't know, but I think that I would like to see some sort of rate of return. Like, is that possible to, I mean, if we're putting up X amount of dollars over the next however many years, how long would it take for the community to potentially see their money back? Or is it going to be potentially a losing investment for the next 50 years? I mean, have we seen the investment back from the original MEM Center? Did that ever, that's sort of what I would like to see in a report before I make a decision on
Yeah.
whether or not I want one. But
Sorry.
Yeah. Sorry.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yeah. Absolutely. And if you look at our phase 2 report, which is again now it's 5 years old, but we go through the economic impact. So the reality is the money's not going to come back to the chief financial officer. It's not going to come back to the coffers of the city. There will be an outgoing every year. There will be a deficit. But the taxation revenue coming in, if there is building around as a result of that investment, that's really where we would focus on. So it's economic impact. Now, just I would say that not everyone is convinced of economic impact, but I would say just look around, look at the U.S. examples. If a municipality puts 150 million investment in its downtown, it's sending a pretty strong signal to the investment community. So whether you go NHL in Edmonton or the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League in Moncton, the opportunity remains the same. So that's the ROI that we would look at. But what we would try and do is, in any business planning that we do, is ask perhaps a bit more difficult question, which is, should you operate it or should you have a third party operator who's a specialist event organizer that can try and minimize your deficit? And they are around, and that's a conversation that I think is way down the road. But yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councillor Crowley. Councillor Burke?
Yeah, thanks through the chair. Excuse me, to the presenter. It's interesting you brought up London. I guess it depends on who you ask about how that has shifted the culture of downtown London. I don't think it's always as straightforward as saying that it adds to the economy. It does. I think it might have in ways, but the people that I have known that have grown up in London have some different things to say. I guess my question to you is going to be about the timeline of this process. And I had a really great chat with staff over the weekend. This was great reading for me to do on a Saturday. Thank you. And it was, I mean that, I learned a lot. And I guess I was kind of critical of the steps of the process, but I kind of hear that that's the best approach to have, is to not rush into these things and to actually do it in these incremental steps. I guess the layer of it is, though, we're trying to find efficiencies. And as Councillor Riel brought up, which I think would be how most of us feel, is that are we continuing to throw money into the consultation here? And are we going to get to a point eventually where we need more money than we have to be able to follow through? So my question is, we've had a steering committee and we've had 6 reports to council. Is there any way that we can speed up the process with the same price to respond to what we're going to probably talk about in a little while here, and really go down the rabbit hole of, can we afford this? What's it going to cost us? And if it's like a realistic thing.
Thank you for the question. Yeah, I think as we've laid out, we're now, come after the pandemic, we've been commissioned in the summer. So we've been on hiatus with the official plan going through, which I think was the right thing to do. There was a focus on, you've got to have those policies in place so that we're not just another project coming in and talking about big picture opportunities for downtown. So I'm hopeful that if council is agreeable, we can move pretty swiftly to firm up costs, design, and then the issue is location and how willing are you to go with the easy option versus the more complicated options, right? In other words, it's city building. So difficult to put a timeline on it, but the process is definitely that.
I mean, through the chair, I'll just rephrase the question then. So in this next step of consultation that we're looking at that has a price tag attached to it, Is there any way that you could consider in that next phase of consultation, looking into what my council colleague brought up about looking at the nuts and bolts of what is the partnership going to look like, and can we afford this? Can that be fast tracked to the next step of consultation, and maybe remove some things that we learned by the 6 reports to council in the steering committee?
We've seen that happen in places like Sudbury, where even the site was on the card in terms of bring a site to us. That's not, I think, the best way. You need to find that site. Then you need to talk about what the likely development is that you can get around this building, and then is that going to generate a financing plan that's possible? The partnerships, at the end of the day, this is going to be public money to build this facility. That's the way this works. So a private developer is not going to take the risk on this. They will offer you a concession, so you can do that. But I would strongly suggest that what you do is you get the site, the business plan in place, which I think is what you're asking for, and then move on swiftly from that. Consultation with the public can be part of that, but that would happen, I think, toward the end of that process.
Thanks. Through the chair. Sorry, just to rephrase, by consultation, I meant the city working with you, the consultant, and not consulting the public. And I guess what I'm asking is that in this next phase of using you as the third party consultant on this project, for this price tag of, I think, $65,000 that we're going to consider tonight, is there any way to speed up the process since we've done the work on looking at locations? Because I know I've seen what that looks like. Can we speed that up? And also during this next phase of the work that you're going to do to be approved or not approved tonight, can we also include some of the things that we talked about?
You have to remind me what we talked about. Sorry. The answer is yes. We can expedite. We can speed it up. I know we've had quite a bit of reporting in the past, but I think that's the nature of the exercise, including, Morrow Park was subject to detailed due diligence, and then of course it was the primary site for a new community center. So there's a little bit of lost effort through that. But I think in terms of your sentiment there, I think, yeah, we'd certainly try and work towards that.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I just assumed by how it was laid out that the funding strategy was still a little whiles away from this chart that you have, but that's fine. I have one more question, please. Just through the chair to prove that I read the report. There was a graph that you had on a historic average attendance at Pete's games, and there was a spike. I remember the 96, 97 Pete's that account for a spike. There was also another spike here in 2006, 2007. Memorial Cup team. Okay. I guess there's my answer, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Thank you, Councillor Burke. Thank you, Councillor Baldwin. I have Councillor DeGay and Mayor Leal. Councillor DeGay.
Thank you, Chair Beamer. Mr. Hack, welcome to our council chambers. Thank you for your presentation. I'd like to refer you to your Exhibit G. And I have also considered the report, like my colleague, Councillor Varick. I read it cover to cover. I've read all the background reports as well. I note in our city's official plan schedules A, B, and C that this property, as well as the adjacent westerly new arena and pool, forms part of our downtown as defined by our official plan schedules. I've considered this particular exhibit, and what it, from my perspective, it really has failed to do is the opportunity that still exists on the other side of the road. This is a property that we own. It's on a transit route. We are contemplating 2 new arenas and a swimming complex. This exhibit shows maintaining a 1-story agricultural building, shows potentially a parking structure. And I'm wondering if there has been consideration for a rethinking of not renovating Memorial Center, keeping it while you build around it. I've actually attempted in my limited abilities is there enough land to do that? And there is. and a parking structure not only to serve the Memorial Center, but also to serve and eliminate some of the surface parking across the road would be beneficial. And then that could conceivably free up the ability to replace or remove, once that's built, the Memorial Center, which we own, city owns, could be made available through a partnership opportunity for a multi-story project. So I looked at this exhibit in isolation, and my take is your report says we cannot renovate the Memorial Center. But what I didn't see is that can we effectively redevelop the Memorial Center site and potentially partner with the municipal lands across the street? That's my question. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for the question. That's a great question. And a studious one. You've read the materials, and I appreciate that. Through you, Mr. Chair, if you look at phase 3 of we did a phase 3 report, which is an absolute mammoth document. And what we do is we look at Morrow Park as an opportunity to put in. Now the positioning is a little different because we didn't have the twin pad going in. But to the extent that if we were to confirm that you were right, you could put a building next to this PMC. In previous years, we have talked about could you link the buildings and do all sorts of things. But phase 3 looked at it and it said, if you took Morrow Park as a location, yes, now it is within the defined central core under the official plan. When we did an analysis of how much uplift in development could happen in 2020, we did that analysis. This one was far less likely to generate surrounding development of density, because you're not really going to expect to see the single family homes get changed. There's going to be some pockets compared to putting something in downtown, which is going to have an acquisition cost to it and so on and so forth. But when you look 20, 30 years out, downtown would be a better funding solution to the building than with this. What I would say to you, though, is things change. I mean, I drove in today and I saw that there used to be a building on the corner there across from the Morrow Park. That's gone. It looks like a big site now. So I think you are right that we can start to look at that again. But from the specific question of now that the community pad's in place, the PMC I wouldn't say could not, should not, in our view, be renovated. We could keep Morrow Park within the mix going forward. And that is phase 3 of our work, which is to start to look at downtown sites. I would just offer to you that, I think we're going to find that another site in downtown, again, taking a 20, 30-year vision on this is probably what you want to do. What you've described, if you were to look at Penticton in BC, and I apologize to give you these sort of various examples, but they are useful. That's a slightly outside of downtown, a big sea of parking. It's the South Okanagan Event Center. There's other paths of ice around it, sports fields. It works really well. I don't think it generates a lot for the downtown there. So same question here, but we'll get into it in the remainder of phase 3.
And if I might, supplementary, Jonathan, your remark, you talked about the 30-year view. My read and understanding of our official plan that there's significant growth contemplated southerly. The downtown is moving south and to a certain extent west. Similarly, our official plan expresses that Lansdowne Street will no longer, the long range, we will not be, this built property will not be looking at a series of single unit dwellings, but likely consolidated multiple unit mixed residential commercial. So I'm of the view that this could precipitate growth where our suburban part of our community meets our downtown. I would be disappointed if we don't seriously consider this site as at least being part of our downtown. Those are my remarks.
If I may, just through you, Mr. Chair, I agree with you entirely. I think it's in the mix, and armed with what we now know from the official plan's intention and the possibilities, I think it's good to look at.
Thank you, Councillor Degay. Mayor Leal?
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair, through you, and thanks very much, John and Richard, for your presentation this evening. Just a couple questions, and maybe this is more for Richard, through you, Mr. Chair, to Richard. We own the Public Works property, Townsend and George. The transit business will be moving out of there in the next couple of years. Could a building that you've outlined in this report, could it fit on that site, right next to Little Lake?
can I just get you to, the mic just
couldn't
got
hear you,
turned
Ray.
off. If you could just press that mauve button. There we are. And if you could just repeat yourself. Thank you so much.
It can certainly be reviewed. That wasn't really what the task was. The task was to review the existing Memorial Center.
If I could just add to that. So you were asking, Mr. Mayor, about whether that George Street site, Townsend, that can, so we've looked at it in phase 2, we've looked at it in phase 3. The answer is yes. It does bump up against the railway. There are some issues there. There's flood issues. They're everywhere, Jackson Creek. You know, it's not easy, but we have a stock of information on it, and I think we would certainly look at it again.
Through you, Mr. Chair, through to John, then, having a site in that general area would certainly benefit from high-speed rail whenever that arrives.
It would. Train station with transit development would be great for it. We again, you know, we were sort of patiently waiting for the news to come down on that, and we're still waiting, I think. But meaning we haven't looked at it again. That site is certainly in the mix. It, just for everyone's information, what we had done in phase 3 was said, why don't we just think about an assembly that without talking to the landowners involved, just goes across that street and takes part of the Market Plaza. And that obviously complicates things, but it gave the opportunity to have a building that would have a better setting to it. So that remains part of the issue that we'd have to report back on.
If I could continue, Mr. Chair, just to follow up from a question that was answered or asked by Councillor Réal. So if it's not under the realm of possibility, if you're looking at a P3 business model to incorporate both residential and commercial to provide additional cash flow in terms of the operation.
Not so much the operation, Mr. Mayor. It would be going to the financing of the building. So if you were to look at a term sheet of how you would defray these capital costs, you know, you would, as I said, rather than position this as funding for a semi-pro team and an event center, which, you know, the province and the feds, they might agree to it, but historically over the last 10, 15 years, it hasn't been a popular enterprise for them grant-wise. But if you look at Moncton as an example, eventually, if you tie this to a bigger vision, that, you know, it's easier for funding agencies to come to the table on this. So that's one thing. Then the rest of it, that which would otherwise go to a debenture, you could, as I said, work out what the tax increment would be from these developments, and you could use your levers in planning to be able to achieve that sort of density, and then that is applied to some of the funding model going forward. And lastly, I would say, you know, there are ways you can get sort of token funding contributions from organizations like BIAs, et cetera, but that doesn't always work. So, but it is a multi-pronged process to get the funding in place.
Through Mr. Chair, John, do you, through your extensive work in this area, do you have empirical data regarding the uplift in adjacent assessment when one of these centers go in, and the percentage of growth of adjacent assessment?
Yeah, thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. We do, and we can certainly supply that if needed. Just in terms of our own, you've heard me talk about Moncton, if only because back in 2009 we did the original work for that, and part of it was to estimate what the uplift would be in assessment. And I think we came in something like $100 million of uplift would occur. If you were to look at it now, I think their uplift is around $80 million, and their building's been up 5 years. But that uplift started the day they announced the decision to start building it. So there is some empirical evidence. If you go to Edmonton, and I recognize it's a very different context, Edmonton, the Rogers place there where the Oilers are in place, the ice district, they have something called a community revitalization levy, which is essentially a tax increment financing approach. So I think I'd be comfortable and be able to come back with some objective opinion.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to John, then Moncton's a good comparator, because Moncton's about 85,000 people.
Yes, yeah, it is. And, you know, the downtown had its challenges. And I think fair to say Peterborough over the years has got a strong bones to its downtown, but just like a number of places, 80,000 people. It's an enterprise center. It's a market town. Contaminated land is sometimes the best thing to do, because otherwise it's a long drawn out process to develop otherwise. So use public investment to achieve that. There are some comparators for sure.
My last question, Mr. Chair, is a bit of a rhetorical question. John, page 26 of your report, you suggest that we don't spend any more money on the PMC, basically.
Well, I think I'd be have to check whether I was writing at speed when I said that. But I think what we're
Maybe I'm
tending-
just paraphrasing you
Yeah.
slightly.
what we would say is you don't want to throw away capital, but you need to keep it going. And our assumption is, given that how important that building is to the community, that you're not going to put a wrecking ball to it. You're going to be looking at alternative
Right.
uses. So you need to keep it healthy.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mayor Lil. Councillor Burke?
Through the chair to Mr. Hack, I appreciate that you were so intimately involved with the Moncton project. I remember reading that project went over budget. Is this a theme with these things, to go way over the budget? Can you just please comment on that?
Yeah, certainly. I'm not sure it went over budget. Budgets get revised. And so it came in as my understanding, around 104 million. The issue, just to give you a sense of that you're not alone in the complexity of putting land together, is that there was a site called the Highfield site, which was a shopping mall. It was basically a dying shopping mall. There was a bay in there as an anchor, and it was a land lease, and it was contaminated land, and the ownership was a family in Toronto. It was difficult. So they put quite a bit of time and effort into just getting the land ready to receive development, probably 4 or 5 million. Certainly costs may have, I'm not privy to the details of the construction that went on. Our work had finished when we were just doing some of the planning stuff. But it came in around 104. Then they built a civic park, which may have been an additional cost as well. But I think if you go into this with the assumption that costs are going to increase, I think that's a healthy approach to take, as opposed to trying to be too careful. And I think if you take what we've said this evening and what we've said previously, we generally try and take a very conservative approach, meaning costs need to be higher and bring them down from there if you can.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Burke. Councillor Purnell?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Nice to see you again, Jonathan. So I'm always intrigued by the location downtown on the city-owned property at Townsend. And I do remember, sir, in one of your previous presentations, an actual site plan of how we would fit both the major sport and entertainment complex plus the additional ice pad. I remember you were able to somehow squeeze that in there on multi-levels. It was pretty intriguing. Do you by any chance have that particular graphic available? And if not now, because I didn't give you any warning on this, if you could maybe dig that up and send it to us again, please. And I do particularly like that location. It needs to be explored more because it is downtown, like proper downtown right now, which gives us all of the regeneration we want downtown. And it's an opportunity to clean up a significant brownfield that is city owned. So it would be great, sir, if you could come up with that graphic for us to show my colleagues, especially our new colleagues, how it would fit.
Through you, Mr. Chair, you'll be happy to work through Karen and Sheldon and provide you with that information.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Purnell. Any further questions for the presenter? Thank you to both of you for being here and all your hard work. All right, so we do have some recommendations in front of us, A, B, and C. Do we have a mover or someone who wants to count?
Mr. Chair, I'll move the recommendations to start the discussion. And I appreciate that this is here with us this evening. And 50 years ago, enlightened leadership, City of Peterborough, put together the landmass that eventually became Peterborough Square, and all the activity that was associated with redeveloping downtown at that particular time. 50 years later, I think there is an opportunity now to certainly revitalize downtown Peterborough for us to continue to pursue a new modern sport and entertainment center. I particularly liked John's answer to the issue of leveraged assessment. By putting one of these in our downtown area, when you look around the country to see where other developments, and Moncton is a very good example, where associated activity around the new center certainly increased dramatically the assessment base in the area, generating that vital taxation that we all need to sustain the activities of a community. And looking at a downtown site, I think would be appropriate at this particular time. And the recommendation is to move forward to go on and look at the next step, Mr. Chair.
Moved by Mayor Leal. Thank you, Mayor Leal. Councillor Duguay.
I was, Chair Beamer, I was prepared to move the motion, but I am certainly satisfied with the report and presentation and would support the recommendation, including my colleague, Councillor Parnell, the material regarding Townsend Street. I do recall that prior to my involvement with council, but it's certainly worthy looking at that property because it is municipally owned, particularly because it's municipally owned. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Duguay. Councillor Burke.
Yeah, thanks. Through the chair, I think that this was a tough one for me because I guess it's frustrating as a counselor to continuously put a decision off and pay for that through the consultation. But I think that through the questioning period from when our agenda went live until tonight, I think all of the questions for the need to do that have been answered. I think that one thing that I got that wasn't necessarily in the report to do with all of this is that the Peterborough Pete's for us define our city in a way that no other OHL team does, right? And we have to make a decision eventually because that building from the 50s isn't going to last. And that's just, I think that's the biggest contributing factor for me. I think that we have to do this and we have to support it. I just wish that the skepticism that I have about finding the hundreds of millions of dollars that this is going to cost eventually, like I wish that skepticism wasn't there, because I think that's going to be a very serious conversation. I don't know if it's a conversation that we're going to have, but it feels to me like reading through the material and thinking about what the Pete's mean to our city, that what else are we going to do? You know, I went to a Pete's game. I waited the whole period for popcorn, and I got there and they ran out of popcorn, and I missed the game had already started. Like I get it, and especially when you compare it to the ages of the other arenas, we got to do something. And so I just, in the same way that my comments to the consultant pointed at, like I just wish there was a way to sort of get us to the decision point about finding the money to do this, because the consultant was very clear that the longer that we wait to do this, the more that it's going to cost us as a city. So those are my comments. I guess the question that I would have for staff, which wasn't addressed, was, is there something that we can do with the building, the current, like, does staff have any sort of like initial strategy about how we can take advantage of that building? You know, eventually when I'm in my 80s or whatever, however long it's going to be, to make use of it.
Through you, Chair Beamer, I quite honestly, at this point in time, I don't believe we've endeavored to look into that. I'm sure as a large structure that has, there's many opportunities to change it into a different format, continue to use it as community ice. At this point in time, demand for community ice continues to be there, and that facility alone, just as community ice, would be quite valuable to have, instead of right now. It's hard to use for community ice because there's events and games and such that necessitate people not being able to play league games in it very easily and those things. So even at a minimum, as a community ice going forward, it's a valuable structure to maintain.
Thank you, Councillor Burke. Any further questions, comments? All right. Councillor Crowley? Yep.
I'm a massive Pete's fan, massive Lakers fan. I just, we literally just heard that, we're looking down the barrel of a 9.59 tax levy, and we're talking about friggin' arena. I'm like, I get it. We need a new MEM center so badly. Like we do, but do we need it that badly right now? That's my only concern. It's like the roof's on fire and we're looking at how we can put a Ferrari in the parking lot. And I'm like, I don't know if now is the right time. I really don't. I get it. And I love everything that you said, but I'm a little bit shell shocked, I think. And I'm not sure if I support it moving forward right now. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Crowley. Further comments? Councillor Baldwin?
Yeah, very quickly, Mr. Chair, I think his worship was on council when they voted to do the renovation. I think it cost, started out at 10 million and it finished at $13 million. And today that building was started in 1954, but opened on November the 8th of 1956. 20 some years ago, if council of the day had decided to build a new facility 20 years ago, your concern wouldn't be even considered today, Councillor Crowley. So, I'm certainly going to support the recommendations. Every day we wait is wasted money. So let's get on with the $65,000 that they're asking for tonight, and give Mr. Hack's company an opportunity to come back and work with council. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Baldwin. Councillor Purnell.
Thank you. Just to follow up on some comments, we are years away. We have to be realistic. We are years away from actually doing this. We have to pick the actual site first. If it indeed is, as an example, the Townsend site, we have to build our new transit garage first, get that going. Then we have to clean up this site. There's many, many things that have to happen. It's always like a puzzle in this city of moving this here and there to make everything fit. So we're a ways away from actually getting shovels in the ground on this, but we do have to keep the project moving forward. And if we can get a site, that is, if we can nail the site down, then we know what we're talking about when we can do a proper design and figure out the financial piece. And I agree, I certainly wouldn't want to be voting on a capital expenditure on this year, but it will come eventually, and we have to start planning for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Purnell, for that. Mayor Leal, for a second time.
Mr. Chair, I want to thank Councillor Baldwin for reminding me of that decision that was made back in 2000.
Oh, yes. No, thanks, Mayor. Good comments. Any further comments or questions? Moved by Mayor Leal, we'll take a vote. And that is carried. Thanks, everyone. Our second presentation for the evening, Community Planning Permit System Feasibility Study. And Commissioner Papadakis, I think you want to make some introductory comments.
Yes, thank you. Mayor Leal, members of council, staff are looking forward to the discussion of this report as it represents another opportunity for our community to meaningfully address the housing supply crisis while accelerating the development of more economically, socially, and environmentally sustainable places. I'll keep these remarks brief as there is some very good content to be presented that we hope frames thoughtful and fair consideration of this topic. First, the official plan clearly articulates a vision of our future community that was co-created through an extensive process. We now must put the regulatory tools in place that will implement this vision. A community planning permit system, or CPPS, is one such tool. Second, the city is committed to meeting aggressive housing targets in line with federal and provincial priorities. This is why a CPPS has been included as part of both our Housing Pledge and our Housing Accelerator Fund application to CMHC. Third, a CPPS has some key benefits in that it reduces land speculation, prioritizes projects that intend to get shovels in the ground, and provides a fast track for projects that are in keeping with the vision of and policies of the official plan. Finally, we are not implementing a CPPS bylaw tonight. The process of developing the bylaw will have robust and extensive consultation with stakeholders, rights holders, and the community. The end product will give certainty to the building and construction industry and the public about how our community will grow. With that, I will turn it over to Ms. Kimball, who will provide some additional information about the project before turning it over to the presenters.
Thank you and good evening through you, Mr. Chair. I'm excited to introduce to you the consulting team leaders for this project. David Riley is a principal with SGL Planning and Design, Inc., and Justine Giannicola is a partner with Dillon Consulting. They are presenting you tonight with the Community Planning Permit System feasibility study that they've prepared for the City of Peterborough. David and Justine have worked together with their team of creative and well-rounded group of professionals and city staff in preparing the document attached to the report in front of you this evening. Both firms have gained a reputation in Ontario for their knowledge and implementation of community planning permit systems, and recently facilitated a session at the Ontario Professional Planners Institute annual conference in Ottawa to an overflow crowd who was interested in what potential may exist in this process for planning across the province. With the approval of the city's new official plan, we find ourselves at an opportune moment to reconsider how we implement the policies of the official plan. We have the opportunity to shape the future of our city with a single document that implements the official plan and our urban design guidelines. Through a streamlined process that guarantees approval within 45 days. The upfront consultation with stakeholders and the public in the creation of the bylaw will replace the current zoning bylaw in areas that are subject to the community planning permit system and will ensure that the community is clear about how we implement our vision. The funding for the feasibility study was granted to the city via the Provincial Streamlined Development Approvals Fund and has been identified in the city's application to the federal government's Housing Accelerator Fund as a key strategic initiative to unlock the potential for more housing units. Implementing a new approvals process, such as the CPPS tool, represents a systemic change that provides greater certainty in the process while accelerating the supply of housing in the city. A significant amount of work needs to be undertaken before Council will have the opportunity to consider an implementing bylaw. The report and the presentation this evening will provide you with an understanding of what this process is, how it differs from the traditional approach to approvals, and how it will streamline the process with a new tool to unlock the potential for the city to develop in accordance with our vision. We are asking that Council consider approving the recommendations of Report IPG PL 23005 before you tonight, to receive the information presented by the consultants, and to direct staff to proceed with the recommendation to initiate the process of implementing a community planning permit system for the city's strategic growth areas. And with that, I'd ask David and Justine to come up and present their report to you.
Welcome to both of you.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Caroline, for that great introduction. I will start the slideshow. Thank you. So my name is David Riley. As Caroline mentioned, I'm from SGL Planning and Design, and I'm joined today by Justine Giancola, standing here. We'll both be from Dillon Consulting, and both happy to be here tonight to present to the city what we think is a great tool that the city of Peterborough could make use of. And it really starts with education. You'll hear us say that a lot through this presentation on what is this tool and what are the benefits of the tool, how other municipalities are using it. And it's really a process change that we're talking about here. So let's start here. So I'll be talking about what is a community planning permit system. And just to shorten those words, when I say CPPS, that is Community Planning Permit System. Then we'll speak a little bit about the provincial and local policy context and discuss who else has implemented a community planning permit system. Talk about the process, benefits and challenges associated with the process and the tool, and a cost-benefit analysis and geographic scoping exercise that is summarized in our report. So let's start with the beginning. What is a community planning permit system? So a community planning permit system is a land use tool that's available to all municipalities in Ontario, and this is done through the Planning Act. municipalities can apply a CPPS, so a community planning permit system, to all areas within a municipality or to specific geographic areas within a municipality. And you can really tailor the system to the local context to which it applies. The system itself is implemented through what's called the Community Planning Permit Bylaw. So generally, a CPP bylaw combines zoning bylaw amendments, minor variances, site plan approval into one single process. And this is, an application process and an approval process. So although there are also a few other processes that can be tied into it, such as you can address site alteration or vegetation removal all through the same process. Generally, you can think of a CPP bylaw similar to a zoning bylaw. So you have permitted uses, you have maximum building heights, you have yard setbacks, all of those things apply. There are just additional measures that you can apply those performance standards, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight. Importantly, I just want to say right off the bat that the CPPS is not a tool to replace the subdivision of land or the land division process. So those process that exist, so a plan and subdivision application or the consent process through the Committee of Adjustment, that is unaffected by what we're talking about tonight. So land division is a completely separate thing. So let's talk a little bit about the provincial legislation, which I'm sure has been a big topic of conversation in this room as of late, and a little bit about the policy review. So members of committee here, you'll all be aware at least somewhat of recent legislative changes that have caused a number of changes in the planning world and really has led to a number of municipalities thinking about ways in which they can use this tool in particular, the CPPS. So some of these legislative changes that are listed here in Bill 108, Bill 109, and Bill 23 are changes to approval and process timelines for applications, so reduced period of time. Requirements to refund fees of applications if a decision is not made within a prescribed timeline. Also changes with respect to the site plan approval process. So you've got exemptions of residential developments of fewer than 10 units now are not subject to site plan approval. And changes to what you can actually address as a municipality through the site plan approval process. So all of these legislative changes that I just mentioned did not affect whatsoever what can be done through a community planning permit system. So all of the available tools that I just mentioned, even through site plan, you can still address what you could address previously through the site plan approval process. You can still address all of those things through a community planning permit system process. So let's dive a little bit deeper into that. But let's talk about your official plan. So the city's new official plan has a section on CPPS, and it acknowledges that it's a strategic planning tool to facilitate intensification and development. It also recognizes that the tool is in addition to what is available now, but you can use it to ensure that the goals, objectives, and the policies of the city's official plan are realized. And this section in the official plan, 720, contains policies that in response to the regulation 17326, which actually says your official plan needs to contain these things if you're going to implement a CPPS. So the City of Peterborough official plan sets out a process essentially to say, we can go this way, and this is what we need to do in our official plan, and ultimately in a bylaw if we want to go this way. So you've already thought about it, and it's already in your official plan, and that puts you, I would say, at the forefront of many municipalities in Ontario, because there's few, I would say, that have such policies in their official plan. So who else has implemented it? So let's talk a little bit about that. So we see here some municipalities on this map. So where there are existing either development permit system, which is the former term for community planning permit system, or current community planning permit systems, Municipalities include the Township of Lake of Bays. They had originally done one for their shoreline areas and have recently expanded to the entire township. The town of Huntsville, they went right from a townwide zoning bylaw right to a townwide community planning permit system. And the bylaw has been in effect since January of this year. We've got the town of Carleton Place and the town of Gananoque, who've had development permit systems for many, many years. Speaking to the planners, they're very happy with working in that system. We've got the town of Innisfil, which also has an existing shoreline bylaw along the shoreline of Lake Simcoe. And I'll speak a little bit more about town of Innisfil shortly. And then there's an existing one in city of Brampton in their downtown. It's called the Main Street North Development Permit System. And so generally from speaking to these municipalities, they have said similar things in our interviews with them, in that they found that there is a more streamlined development approvals process. There is flexibility in a bylaw to have different applications and set thresholds so that many of the applications can be delegated right to staff for approval and don't need to go to council. And that's because the bylaw, the application would meet a certain standard that is acceptable as outlined in the bylaw. It provides flexibility in approaches to meet the 45-day approval timeline, and one of those things is conditional approvals. I'll speak a little bit about that later. The merging of different application process, such as site alteration, minor variance, all into one process, as well as the ability to tie in design guidelines right into the bylaw itself through criteria that specifies exactly how design guidelines are going to be met or achieved, or through reference to external documents and having criteria reference that external document. Some of the municipalities that are looking now and doing studies, and if I was in any of these municipalities doing a presentation, I would also be adding Peterborough to that list. So you can see there aren't too many right now, but it's growing. These are all active studies right now, and that's what I mean when I say Peterborough is, I would say, at the forefront of many municipalities in Ontario, because you're one of the first ones to be doing this. So we've got the city of Burlington, which very recently in September issued a draft bylaw surrounding their 3 GO station, major transit station areas. And this came after lengthy, many years process of creating area-specific plans. We got the town of Innisfil, which made the decision a couple of years ago to expand to a town-wide community planning permit system. And Justine and I are both working for the town of Innisfil on that phased-in approach. The city of Waterloo, we just completed a very similar study to what this is for the city of Peterborough for the city of Waterloo. They have also applied to the Housing Accelerator Fund for funds to carry forward with undertaking a community planning permit bylaw for their major transit station areas. We've got Ottawa, who's initiated a pilot study for one of their employment lands districts in Canada and looking at doing some innovative things there. And Markham is also currently exploring options to integrate a CPPS. They haven't undertaken a background study as of yet. Also, Saugeen Shores has undertaken a background study. I went backwards here. Let's talk a little bit about the process, and then I'll hand it off to Justine for a little bit more detail. But you might still be wondering, okay, how is this different from the traditional process? So what this slide does is that on the left, kind of 2/3 of the slide outlines the current process in terms of approvals and public consultation and appeals. And then the right third of the screen is what that process looks like under a community planning permit system. So let's talk about approvals. So you've got zoning bylaw amendments, minor variances, and site plan approval all running through separate streams with different approval timelines, ranging from 60, 90 days approximately, versus all of these different application process being considered in one process and a decision being made within 45 days. And that decision would be made either by staff if it's a delegated application, or council or a planning committee. With respect to public consultation and appeals, we've got zoning bylaw amendments. As we know, there's mandatory notification requirements, public meetings, and they're subject to third-party appeals. Minor variances, recently there's been a change, no longer subject to third-party appeals, but of course there's mandatory public notice, public comments at the Committee of Adjustment hearing. And then we've got site plan approval, which has no legislative public consultation or notices. So within a community planning permit bylaw, the focus is really front-ended in terms of public participation and public engagement in the development of the bylaw itself. The idea is you've generated buy-in from the entire community and that decisions could be made quicker. There's no mandatory public meetings or notice as part of any development applications as with a community planning permit system. And only the applicant in all applications has the right to appeal. Now, in practice, though, many municipalities have actually implemented notification requirements for community planning permit applications. Many of them even, go beyond just posting the application on their website, but also, posting a sign on the property, sending out notices, providing a venue to provide feedback within that 45-day time frame. And if the application is delegated to council for approval, they can come to the council meeting and speak their mind. So a lot of municipalities have instituted those processes. And the last slide before I turn it over to Justine to talk about the benefits and challenges, but one of the key benefits that you've heard me say a few times is streamlined development approvals process. And this slide, in a nutshell, really summarizes it, where you've got the top being the current approvals process compared to a community planning permit system process. And you can see everything in the gray box, which is zoning bylaw amendment, minor variances, and site plan, combined into one application on the line below. So you go right from submission to one application process to building permit, as opposed to potentially multiple different application process in a lengthy period of time. So with that, I will turn it over to Justine.
Thanks, David. So I'm going to go through just a few of the core benefits that just building on what David said. So as you heard, a single application process with a shorter approval times that can support getting housing to market faster. We also, there also provides increased certainty and transparency in the process, given that it defines the rules of development up front. It defines where variation can be considered. It defines the criteria that one needs to use to consider variations, and provides a more stable planning vision with reduced likelihood of appeal. One of the other reasons why this is particularly appealing for a number of municipalities is its ability to customize the bylaw itself to the community needs. So whether that is in how the municipality is looking for landscaping, parkland dedication, the need for affordable housing, urban design considerations, heritage preservation, through a single document, unlike zoning, which has a number of limitations on what one can specify. A CPPS has quite a bit more flexibility in identifying where a number of standards would be considered and where conditions could be applied. And it's also particularly helpful as it relates to securing essential community needs or what's needed for complete communities. And so this is where some of those elements around affordable housing, around parkland dedication, and some of the other critical community needs, which have been impacted by the most recent legislative changes. This is a particular value in this tool. Lastly, I just wanted to mention that it does free up council time and agendas to deal with the most pressing, challenging issues that you have as a community. And once the development rules are in place and those development rules have been prepared based on council and community input and feedback, and once they're in place, if a development application meets those rules, there isn't a need to come back to council. If they're fundamentally going beyond a threshold defined by council through the bylaw, that's when there's need for additional council engagement. So it sets that framework in the bylaw itself. Some of the challenges you may have thought about already. It's a big change management exercise. And with any change management exercise, there's a big component of education, whether it is with staff, with council, with the community, with development interests, to make sure that people understand the rules and the process and how they participate. In addition, it is, while it's been around and available to municipalities across the province for some time now, it is still relatively new, and the number of municipalities that have used it is relatively a short list, as David had highlighted. So this does it does cause need for additional education and support in its rollout. If it is implemented just in a specific area, there is potential for, now you have to run two systems. So there's always potential for complication or some challenges as it relates to implementing and supporting two systems at once. And that's why you heard some municipalities have gone right to the citywide bylaw. And staff capacity is another one. 45 days is a short timeline. What that means is you need a robust process where complete application requirements are clear and detailed, and pre-application or pre-consultation requirements help support good quality submissions on day one. You have a process that provides dedicated staff to look at reviews, and you're using your conditions of approval or provisional approval to provide agreement in principle, identifying a number of conditions that may be needed before one can proceed to building permit. So there is a number of ways to help support those components. As it relates to the cost benefit analysis, what we looked at here is 3 different scenarios in terms of rollout. In terms of implementation, we started with the idea of piloting a community planning permit system in the central area of Peterborough. We also looked at the second option being across all your strategic growth areas. So that would include the central area plus your mixed use corridors. And then if you went citywide, and that would include the entire municipal boundary. And each of these scenarios is considered based on status quo, being an update to the existing comprehensive zoning bylaw. So I'll start first with scenario 1, central area. And so your central area contains your urban growth center, which is planned to achieve 150 people and jobs by 2031. It has a number of land use designations, including downtown core area, business district, industrial conversion area, downtown neighborhood, downtown open space, and the Little Lake South District and Jackson Creek Special Policy Area. By focusing on this geography, you would pick up approximately 20% of historic development applications annually, and based on some forecasts, about 35% of the forecast applications. This scenario represents the least effort in the sense of it is a pilot, it's a smaller geography, it's an area that you have existing urban design guidelines that could be used to help define the framework. But it does, in compared to the other 2 options, it would have less total applications that would fall into this new system. It would require that you're running 2 systems at once across the city, and it would have only a number of applications that could address things like need for services, facilities, and matters, or transparency and predictability in the process that the CPPS adds. As it relates to the second scenario, the strategic growth areas, this scenario would pick up about 37% of historic applications. But if we look at where the city is planning to grow, this actually picks up almost 70% of the forecasted application volume. By covering your urban growth center and a central area and your mixed use corridors, this would pick up both major and minor mixed use corridors, and could pick up the mixed use corridor urban design guidelines, which we understand are drafted. This also would allow the bylaw to focus on intensification and mixed use, urban design, and built form in these priority strategic growth areas. The last option, being citywide, would allow a single system to apply to the entire municipality. It would allow all growth to have the same kind of rules and framework, but within that framework would have different development standards depending on the geography. It would you would not have a zoning bylaw anymore. In this case, you can hear from some others, Huntsville, they've actually removed their committee of adjustment. So it does significantly change the way implementation is covered. But there is certainly a lot more upfront work required to implement a new system citywide. So you would have seen in the consultant's report a number of components around the cost benefit analysis. This is intended to be a high level qualitative analysis to assist the city in beginning to understand the financial impacts of switching over either partially or fully to a CPPS. Generally, where you see a check mark, that is intended to indicate a benefit, and a dollar symbol is intended to indicate a cost. And this is based on a number of city resources and information that's being provided to the consultant team around volumes of applications, cost of development applications, and the existing design guidelines that the city's been working on. And so in terms of a recommended approach, based on the analysis, we do think that there's a number of opportunities in your strategic growth areas that would benefit from this system. It would capture the majority of your growth citywide and really focus your efforts on those areas that you're intending to see the most change in the future. This would pick up your central area and your mixed-use corridors, which all together go across the city and would provide important connections to a diverse range of residential, commercial, employment, cultural, and entertainment and open space uses. And it would allow the municipality to really focus on those strategic intensification areas for the long term. I will stop there. I'm sure you've got a number of questions, and David and I would be happy to answer any of them that we can. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. So we do have a few questions for the presenters. I have Councillor Reel, Baldwin, LaChica, and enough on the question. Yep. Councillor Reel, question.
Through the chair, I'll move the report when applicable. I want to thank Ms. Kimball. I had a number of questions today, and certainly she took the time to go over this report with me, but I have some questions for the consultants. And the first one, and I don't know if you have the same paperwork that I have, but on page 11, it says, please explain to me that step 4, it seems to be you're designing to remove city council from process. I don't know if you have that page or not in your report. And it kind of states here in the step 4 decision, city staff and council, depending on the permitted class within 45 days timeframe, may impose conditions and approval. It sounds to me like you're removing council from the process. That's just me reading through that. So can you give me some comfort on that one?
Through you, Chair. Thank you for the question. So the intent is, by defining a community planning permit system and going through the exercise of preparing the bylaw, there would be significant council, public, developer, staff input to define the rules of development. If a development application, once you have the bylaw that bylaw can be appealed. There is a full process, statutory public meeting, notice requirements. Once you have a bylaw in force and effect, if an application comes in, depending on the framework that you define in the bylaw itself, and an application comes in and meets the standards defined by the bylaw, it would be typical, based on all of the CPPSs that have been set up so far, that would not need to come back to council. That would be a delegation to staff.
And if I could just maybe provide an example. So the way that bylaws have been set up, for example, you've got a standards for each zone. So you've got front yard setbacks. Say your front yard setback requirement was 10 meters and a minimum of 10 meters. but someone wanted to propose an 8-meter front yard setback. So that is a variance for another, to use that word. The bylaw can establish individually for each provision what the threshold would be for a variance to be considered by staff versus a variance to be considered by council. So you could say 20% is usually a common benchmark in the bylaws that we've seen. So a 20% variation from a certain standard, if it's 20% or less, that's a staff delegation. If it's 20% or more, well, then council wants to hear about it. And so that's just an example. You can set it to be 50% or 5% based on individual provisions.
So, so the bylaw itself establishes those rules, and you as council would both prepare, vote on and approve the bylaw.
The next question I had is on page 122, which is part of your report here, and it's certainly it's a public and shareholders consultation. What are your thoughts on this? I mean, I'm a stickler on, I'm elected by the taxpayer of the city of Peterborough to do a job for them. I'm a big stickler that I think that, you know, when we're moving the city forward, the public should have their say in how their city should be built. When I was reading this, it looks like it's taking them out of the equation. So can you give me some comfort level on that? Am I reading this properly? Because I think it's important to, though you want to speed things up and move the process forward, but if you're missing the key element of or the public or the shareholders consultation, you're missing the whole thing, because the people, what do they want their city to be like?
Through you, Chair. Fantastic question again. And so if you think about the framework that we work within in planning, you've got your official plan that went through a number of consultation with key stakeholders, the community, hopefully a number of different community members and representatives. And as you get down into land use regulations, when you define the bylaw, the community planning permit bylaw, it's really important that those rules, you have a significant community and input, stakeholder input on the rules of the bylaw itself, because those are the rules that everyone will be held to account in terms of in proposing a development application. So whether that is in Huntsville, when we did the townwide CPPS, and there was a technical committee, a community liaison committee, 4 or 5 rounds of engagement, public meetings, a number of back and forth with one-on-one meetings with different stakeholders. You really want to make sure that the upfront process to define those rules is a robust engagement plan. Once a bylaw is in place, there is an opportunity, as David had highlighted, to introduce additional public notice requirements. It's just that the legislation does not have any minimum notice requirements. So what you heard from David was a number of municipalities have introduced that in their bylaw. One thing that is fundamental about the system is there is no third-party appeals. So that's a opt-in, opt-out, right? That's in the legislation itself if you choose to go through a CPPS. And so again, the concept is, if you're working within the framework that has had all the public input and feedback and defined the vision and the goals and where the growth is going to go and what the rules of development are, if you've worked within that, then there isn't third-party appeal. If you're going outside and require an amendment to the bylaw, then you're subject to the regular process. So statutory public meeting, third-party appeals, everything. So the intent of streamlining is really for those who work within the defined rules that you establish, that would not require additional rounds of public engagement and third-party appeal rights.
My final question has to do is inclusionary zoning, and certainly I think we're no different than the other community, but the ones that you've put this here in place in communities and talking about affordable housing and how the city can impose some sort of rules on developers. And I'll use the word rent geared income. Affordable housing, or the word affordable is overused. What we need in the city, in our community, is rent geared income housing. That's what we need. So therefore, what are you finding in the other communities on the inclusionary zoning of us putting in some sort of provision that any development has to have some sort of rent geared to income housing, as affordable, using the word affordable, because somebody paying $2,000 a month is not affordable. Somebody that can only afford $600. So what are you finding in the communities that you try or that instituted this?
Through you, Chair. Maybe first I'll speak to Burlington and then David can speak to a few of the other examples. In the case of Burlington, they were looking to do inclusionary zoning. And as you know, under inclusionary zoning, there are a number of rules and stipulations and market analysis that has to be done to help support that. And it does have a number of limitations in terms of its ability to see affordable housing units realized. And so what you would see now is in the draft community planning permit system that has been made public and they're in consultation at the moment, is that they've introduced a framework for affordable and attainable housing that looks at under the services, facilities, and matters, which is, maybe I'll step back. So community benefits charge is not applicable under a community planning permit system. The community planning permit bylaw would define instead services, facilities, and matters. Services, facilities, and matters are not limited by the Planning Act limitations around parkland dedication, for example, nor inclusionary zoning market requirements. And so what you'll see in the case of the city of Burlington is they put forward a draft that has very specific percentage of either lowest decile incomes, number of units required versus moderate decile incomes, affordable number of units required, and then attainable units. And so what the community planning permit system can provide is an opportunity to define the framework. And in that case, it's for additional height and density. And then you can provide additional affordable housing units as a requirement. And those could be defined as rent to own for sure, or rent to income, pardon me.
And it's very, very flexible, I think, is what you hear Justine saying, and that's one of the ultimate benefits of a community planning permits bylaw. In terms of the other municipalities, certainly the city of Waterloo is the one that comes to mind that is probably the one that is doing this primarily for the reason of providing for affordable housing. They are having a serious they're not dissimilar to the city of Peterborough, where there's a large student population. Student accommodations is a huge issue in the city of Waterloo, and affordable housing by extension, not just for the students, but for the broader community, because there's a lot of competition between students needing housing as well as just non-students needing housing. And so this is one of the reasons, and through what Justine has just mentioned, they're going to be exploring using their bylaw in a similar way to provide for housing that's more affordable. Huntsville hasn't used the bylaw in that reason, neither has Lake of Bays, and I think that's really just a product of where their geography is. It's not to say that they won't in the future, but the draft or the current bylaw that is out there right now does not require provision of affordable housing.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Reel. I have Councillor Baldwin, LaChica, Parnell, Burke, Duguay. Councillor Baldwin.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'll be very brief. Thanks to the presenters. And thanks to Mr. Papadakis for our discussion regarding the report on Friday. I found that very helpful. The report makes a lot of sense to me. It streamlines the process. My question is, we're going to need a robust staff in order to meet the 45-day deadline. That may require hiring additional staff. So with respect to the CPPS, are the fees adjusted to the point where it's feasible to hire the necessary professional staff to deliver on the 45-day deadline? In your experience with the communities?
Yeah, so so we've had some follow-up discussions with the town of Huntsville, for example, on how they went about dealing with their fees, and other municipalities. All municipalities generally, taking a step back, have described that they haven't had to hire additional staff to deal with the change. And the reason is because built into the process, essentially, are all of the checks and balances that you need to make the application run smoothly. So one of the things you might think 45 days, I have to do all this in 45 days, but you build in a robust pre-consultation program, as Justine mentioned, and also relying on the use of conditional approvals. So with a conditional approval counts for that 45-day approval. So if the city was not satisfied, but generally in principle thought, okay, we are good with this, we just need some additional details. And it could be site plan related details that you would normally address, like, the specific access or the location of this access or landscaping requirements. You could make the decision on a permit application conditional on the submission of additional items that are addressed subsequent to that 45-day timeline. And with that, the proponent of the development application has, confidence that, okay, we're moving forward here. I'm working with the city and this is great. And there's they're not going to appeal it because they've received a conditional approval in that case. So there's benefits there. But generally, there hasn't been a need to hire additional staff, and they've worked their application fees and it's something that they're evaluating and monitoring as they go. But to generally account for similar, they looked at similar study to what you guys did with the application projections. And based on that, you set your fees based on that to cover off costs.
Mr. Chair, I'm impressed. It makes sense. It streamlines the process and at no additional cost. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Baldwin. Councillor LaChica.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and to Justine and David. Your presentation was so helpful because the report was fulsome, but it really took a microscope to some details that I didn't see in the report quite yet. So a couple of questions. As downtown ward councillors in a city where there is a great deal of heritage factors that we consider and have in the past, the design line piece that you've talked about is significant. And am I understanding that the bylaw has the scope to be able to include promoting design excellence, including heritage attributes? Is there that latitude, and would that insist on it being regulated as opposed to it being incentivized only? Thank you. That was the first question, and then afterwards I'll ask the second question. Thanks.
Through you, the chair. So yes, there is latitude to define both should statements and shall statements in the bylaw itself. In addition, it provides municipalities with a thing that municipalities have been asking for a long time, which is the concept of conditional zoning. So if you do this, then you can do this. That's not available under a zoning bylaw, but that can be defined in a community planning permit system. So you can see for things like cultural heritage preservation, if you do this, then you can get this, can be a very helpful tool, whether it is if you, retain, this component of the building, you can build additional height and density behind, or whatever the parameters could be. So there is both the opportunity to integrate design guidelines into the bylaw, and also to look at the standards themselves and define instances where certain standards may or may not apply.
Thank you. That's very helpful to know. Second question, can the new bylaw, if it were, in areas of growth as you're recommending, would it and could it include green development standards into it as well? Just because that hasn't been emphasized so much here. Thanks.
Through you, the chair, same answer, right? So because you have the ability to define the conditions that you want, there is flexibility. Again, like I think you, in preparing the bylaw, you want to think about what you're putting a shall statement on, and to make sure that that is something. So if it's outside of if it requires an amendment to the bylaw, the process is back to a very lengthy process. So you don't want to require an amendment for things that should not be a shall statement, should not be a shall statement. But yes, is the simple answer.
So thank you. And through you, Mr. Chair, it really sounds like, taking the express train is a much better way to go than taking the local train, the milk route. And this seems like a really excellent process to be able to expedite our needs around our housing crisis, especially affordable housing, supportive housing, all the things we need in our landscape. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor LaChica. Councillor Purnell, Burke and Duguay. Councillor Purnell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, David and Justine, and I do appreciate all the questions of my colleagues as well to you. It's really has been quite helpful. And we do understand that we set the rules with the guidance of staff on all of this. But one of the questions that I've heard is, what about a subdivision, a new subdivision, or if there was a complete mall redevelopment, say like as an example, the Brookdale Plaza in Peterborough, if that was to be completely redeveloped, I imagine we set the rules, that parameter, but typically in other communities, where is that parameter on some big projects like that?
That's a really good question. So typically, if you're seeing a in the current framework, I'll use mall redevelopment. I think that's a great example. If you have a zoning bylaw and there's a mall, it's generally subject to a commercial zone, for example, right now, a specific type of commercial zone that permits certain uses, requires certain setbacks. If you wanted to rebuild that mall and introduce mixed uses, you'd have to go through an extensive process, probably plan a subdivision, rezoning, importantly, to define and identify new zones for that property. So the way it would work for a community planning permit system is actually really similar. So the community planning permit system would define a district or a precinct. There's different terminology you can equate that to the zone, the word zone. And so a mall in the community planning permit system could be a commercial precinct, for example. If there was a redevelopment coming forward that was completely reimagining what that site would look like, the proponent would have to apply for an amendment to the community planning permit bylaw, which is not a permit application. It's actually an amendment, which would be the same process as a zoning bylaw amendment, where they would have to submit studies. It would be subject to public consultation, review, very much like a zoning bylaw amendment, which would establish new standards in the context of a community planning permit system for that area. A plan of subdivision in a similar way. So the town of Huntsville, for example, within their urban area has large undeveloped pieces of land that are within the urban area. They're designated residential, but the zoning is, I don't remember if it's future development or development, something like that, which basically says you have to come in and rezone these lands to establish, what this is going to look like and what the permissions are going to be. So the CPP bylaw now in this context would require still for those lands an amendment to bring forward, which would be subject to a fulsome review, almost like a mini scale developing a CPP bylaw just for that property. So it would be subject to public engagement.
Okay, thank you. So there are checks and balances for much bigger projects. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Purnell. Councillor Burke.
Thanks through the chair. Thank you for the presentation, and thanks to staff for taking my calls over the weekend and helping me digest all of this. I feel like I have a good understanding. And I share some of Councillor Riel's concerns about how the public interest, like the safeguards that protect the public interest, feels like it could be lost through some of this process. But my understanding is that balance between streamlining and public engagement is found by our official plan. It's found by our design guidelines. And it's also done through the upfront consultation phase from now until when the bylaw gets written. And you keep saying you guys get to do that, but I think it's actually staff that does that. And it was one of the parts of the report that was a little ambiguous for me, like about how it's going to be done. And Innisfil, with their focus on the shoreline, they had like a regional specific approach, right? And where they use their conservation authority to help develop those standards. And so it would be great for me to have some to use your experience and for you to ask, or for you to tell council what are some things that we can do to embed the public interest into this upfront consultation period.
That's a great question, and maybe we'll provide just some examples that we've personally been involved in, so that and maybe an ongoing example is the town of Innisfil. As you just mentioned, they started with their what they call the Our Shore bylaw, which is their shoreline permit system. They're now expanding into a townwide community planning permit system, and even just through the background review phase of this study, we've had several touch points with many different groups, including technical advisory committee, which consists of staff from the municipality, as well as the county, the conservation authorities. We're all commenting on, okay, how is this going to affect us in the change and expanding, including, we're starting with Alcona, which is their primary settlement area. Other than that, we have a community development or community advisory committee, CAG, community advisory group, which consists of members of the public. They had to apply to become members. Very different backgrounds. One of the ladies, for example, used to work for the Innisfil Public Library, and just a wealth of knowledge and just knows everything about Innisfil. It's great to have on this committee. We also have a development liaison group, which is members from the development community. And you might be curious, okay, what do they think about it? They're actually very positive about it. From our experience in Huntsville and Innisfil, they're all very much looking forward to working with us and developing the bylaw and reviewing, standards as they come through and process changes. Members of the public is kind of our next touch point. We haven't even developed the bylaw. We've just been dealing with background studies. Here we are having already had all these touch points with the community through the development of the bylaw, which is coinciding with the development of urban design and placemaking guidelines. So Innisfil is going down that similar approach to Peterborough would be taking in terms of that integration of the bylaw and the guidelines. We're developing the guidelines, though, concurrently with the bylaw and doing kind of a combined public and stakeholder engagement so that everyone understands kind of the big picture all at once. A combination of virtual, in-person sessions, surveys we have planned, you name it.
And I guess in terms of as a city, trying to find ways to reach different voices, underrepresented groups that might not have access to the online forums like YouTube or Connect Peterborough. Do you have any strategies on how to engage with those communities?
Yeah, so one of the opportunities is through identification of kind of who are your kind of key community members that can take this to their existing groups. So whether that is, youth groups, the urban indigenous population and organizations that exist, immigrant services, thinking about some of these harder to tap into target audiences and really helping facilitate through some of their existing forums, information sharing and support so that you're going to the community in places where they are already comfortable and participating, and you're building that trust early on in the process and that education to be able to provide meaningful input before the rules are established.
Thanks. And through the chair, the city has a heritage office with 2 staff. And in this report, I guess the staff side of the report, the city's vision statement talks about our unique culture and our heritage. How would we be able to protect that? Like in some of the examples, it feels like they were a little bit dated. Gananoque, for instance. Like, have you seen that the Planning Act has changed how we can protect historical buildings? I know with the Heritage Office, like given the timeline, we couldn't zone, like there wouldn't be time for staff to prepare a designation and bring it to council within that timeline. Do you have any feedback for that, please?
So yeah, that's a great point. I mean, those Planning Act changes essentially, just to summarize, if there's a listed property, you have a certain amount of time to designate it, or it comes off your list of designated properties or of listed properties. That process still applies. It's kind of parallel and unrelated to the CPPS. I think what we can do in a community planning permit bylaw is better tie what would be traditional zoning bylaw to those heritage attributes by bringing in those defining elements of character and setting them into guidelines or standards within the bylaw itself. But you would still be subject to those requirements set out by the Heritage Act and the Planning Act for heritage properties.
Thanks. And through the chair, my final question is, in your experience, are there ever examples of phasing this in so that council would hear back about when we approve this tonight to do the specific pilots with the mixed use corridor and with the central area? Have other municipalities ever had like a phased approach where staff would bring back their plan for the upfront consultation, what groups they're going to hit? Because that information is sort of lacking in the report. Would that be something that we could ask so that in preparation of building the bylaw?
I think in some way, so the example of Innisfil, like there has been 2 or 3 council touch points already, and we haven't even started drafting the bylaw for Alcona. So there is constant council update and input. And I won't speak to staff about thoughts on this process, but certainly I think there's opportunity for a number of check-in points throughout the process.
And if I could just add to that, the city of Waterloo is although town of Innisfil has committed to a townwide bylaw, but phasing it in by geographic area, the city of Waterloo they're not prepared to go citywide at this point. They're prepared at this point, and it has not gone to council, I will say. This is me talking to staff, and the recommendation that we put forward is staff's position is that they're prepared to go on a pilot basis to their ION station areas. ION is the name of the light rail transit system through Waterloo Region, and their station area master plans, which are their major station areas, and starting with those areas.
Great, thanks for answering those.
Thank you, Councillor Burke. I have Councillor Degay and Hakey. Councillor Degay.
Thank you, Chair Beamer, Justine, and David. Thank you for your presentation. Very informative. You spoke earlier that the CPPS could rule in what we understand might be guidelines, but they could conceivably become standards. Could you clarify that, please? I'm referring to urban design guidelines in our strategic growth areas outside of the CBD or downtown.
Yeah, so just as an example, you could, a typical urban design guideline might be, you might be familiar with terminology 45-degree angular plane, really dealing with the transition of built forms, so taller built forms to existing, maybe neighboring low-rise areas. So that's an example of something, instead of a guideline, it could actually become a standard that is directly put right into the bylaw in response to what the guideline was trying to achieve in terms of achieving that appropriate transition. Yep.
And through you, the chair, if I can just add one, that example actually, in the case of Burlington, there's a angular plane gets a lot of different feedback from different developers and whether there's a particular like for the concept or not. And so what we actually looked at is you either can provide an angular plane, whether it's 45% angular plane or a setback of a certain distance or a step back of a certain amount. So because you can define different conditions, we can say, what we're trying to avoid is overlook of the adjacent property between an area of significant change in a stable residential area. And so we actually can, through the bylaw, define, different instances where if the overall objective is being met, whether it is angular plane on one site or a step back or a setback, all of those can achieve the objectives there. So just to take that one step further.
So there could be opportunity that certain guidelines may be appropriate to evolve as standards, but not all. Am I hearing that correctly?
That's correct. Yes. And just the bylaw itself is appealable. And so if you put something in there that, to your point about appropriate, that goes too far, I think you'll hear from those who are looking at those standards.
If I might, Mr. Chairman, I have a few other points. I might state for the record that I support the program. This is the evolving reality of planning, land use planning in cities in Ontario. This is the direction the province has been telling the planning profession for years. They've told us at OPPI in Ottawa, there was reference in AMO, the very same topic. It's been referenced in previous workshops. So this has been forthcoming. The 45-day timeline presupposes or assumes that all the heavier lifting has already been done. So the development consultant or the developer and their team have pre-consulted with this city, which they have a very robust and established pre-consultation program. All that's been filed, all the technical adequacy reviews are in place. And then from that date, that would be your 45-day timeline for staff, Mr. Appleby and his group, to marshal this forward. Is that correct?
Yes, upon complete application, upon receipt and confirmation of complete application,
Okay.
yes.
So the notion of complete application, which I think we've previously addressed, is paramount in this process. Thirdly, I want to speak to minor variances. And I can speak to these planning applications from professional perspective, but so minor variances, there are often, and they are very minor in nature, just by their very, but some are very, very minor. This CPPS could have the propensity of, within the program, of eliminating, for example, somebody wanting to put a small shed in the rear yard of their property was slightly too close to a lot line. That could be within that band where staff could be delegated to approve same, correct?
Yes, that's exactly right.
Those are my questions for now. I will have questions, Mr. Chairman, later for staff, but thank you for a very informative presentation.
Thank you very much, Councillor Duguay. Councillor Hickey.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And Justine and David, thank you for the presentation. I certainly support the intent of this. Like Councillor Duguay, we've chatted extensively, but I want to go to, as an example of some of the issues that I have. If we go to page 120 of your report, it talks about, and this is piggybacking on what Councillor Duguay was saying, the province was very specific in changing some of the rules around Bill 23 so that we speed up things. In the fourth paragraph here, it talks about through the passing of Bill 23, changes to site plan control process include exempting developments of 10 units or less for site plan control. This CPPS put site plan control back into the city's hands. That to me is counter to what the policy was from the government. Can you talk to that?
Through you, the chair. So that's, I guess, my reminder that the bylaw itself is appealable, right? So Bill 23's reduction to not include to exempt site plan for unit development under 10 units did not impact community planning permit systems. If you put forward a bylaw that the development industry thinks is not reasonable, you will probably end up in appeals for a long period of time. Those are both true statements. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a concern. And the other question that I have really, I want to see the input from the public, from the development side also. But if we're looking, and I don't know that you can answer this, but Mr. Papadakos may have to step in here. Recommendation B, and this goes back to, and we just had this discussion recently. If I'm reading it correctly, what it's saying is if we support this tonight, we agreed to implement CPPS plan, but we haven't had the consultation. Is that my understanding, Mr. Papadakis? Commissioner Reyna, or CAO Reyna shaking his head no.
Yeah. So as the report indicates in the executive summary, right, the preparation of a bylaw will involve robust consultation, robust and extensive consultation with the development community, public Indigenous communities, and determining the proposed flexibility and land use permissions and regulations intended to reflect official plan policies.
Thank you. That's what I was looking for. So I think for a lot of the lay people here, it could be easier if it was just said, hey, we're doing public consultation in that, in the recommendations. But thank you. That's more what I'm concerned about. And I think everybody here is.
If I can just add to is, you know, on the notion of touch points with council, right? I think that council should, you know, those who were here last term of council would recall, you know, the process that we undertook for big bodies of work like the transportation master plan, right? The transportation master plan, we came, like when we developed the work plan for working towards what that was going to be, that was a phased process, and we came back to council, I believe it was 4 times, right, at various steps of the process, say, this is where we're at now. We want to get approval on these matters before we move ahead, because there was no point in us spending a huge body of effort to come to a final product to realize that there are some key, like, fundamental principles that were implemented that council wasn't willing to support.
Thank you very
we would
much.
do similar thing.
Yes, you put me at ease. It's those small items that have the twist that concern me, but that's why I want to hear definitely from the consuming public, which is the developer mostly, on this. So thank you very much. I certainly support it.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Hickey. I have Councillor Burke, Duguay. Councillor Burke?
Quickly through the chair to the consultants, thanks. And thanks to staff for sort of answering my question via email. But do you have examples? Councillor Riel was talking about affordability. I guess I'm not clear. Can we actually define what that is, or do we have to use a provincial definition?
The draft CPPS that the city of Burlington has put forward has affordability indexes defined in Appendix C, I believe, of the bylaw.
Are through the chair, is that their own indexes, or is that the provincial?
So based on their housing strategy, the city undertook a housing strategy, looked at household income by deciles, has outlined it by deciles and updated it. So there is some work that significant work that goes into that sort of effort, but that is not defined by the province. That's defined by the city.
Very much.
Thank you, Councillor Burke. We'll Councillor Duguay, and then we'll try to move on to recommendations. Councillor Duguay.
I'll pass for now. I have a few questions later for staff. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you to both of you for being here and all your hard work. Really appreciate it. All right, we have due recommendations. I know Councillor Purnell has asked to move them, so I have Councillor Purnell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As chair of the planning portfolio, I am happy to move this, and also thank staff for bringing this forward as a significant milestone in our bigger goal of creating additional housing in the most cost-effective, time-consuming way. This will help us achieve those 4,700 units that we've pledged to do, and hopefully attain some of that provincial money that has been pledged by the province. So this is a way that we can, as has been said, streamline the whole process. It does reduce the application time and money, not only for the people who are building the homes, but also for our staff. It'll get us to that building permit part quicker. It does stop, and this is important, it does stop speculation where people will rezone a property and then sit on it for years and decades. If you go through this process, you have got to get shovels in the ground or it will time out. And that is important because we have so many projects already in the queue that are just sitting there. So we have to get past that. We have heard that this is a pilot. It's not citywide just yet. We will see how it works in the 71% of our area, which is significant pilot, and should make things. And we will have the opportunity to reflect, measure the success and the opportunities from the pilot. We have heard repeatedly that there will be extensive consultation with all stakeholders as we prepare this bylaw. So that it is the best possible bylaw to encapsulate as many possible applications as it can without crossing that threshold that we are comfortable as a council with working in tandem with our experienced staff in this area. And so the bigger projects, yes, we can maintain control of it and then let staff through this process handle many of the smaller projects that really do not need to have separate reports and come to planning committee and council. And we have a lot on our plate as well. So this definitely will help. This also will provide some assurity that if a community member, an investor in our community wants to build something to invest in our city, create housing, there's some assurity that they're going to not be stopped at the very end with, not in my backyard, as a very simple example. If it meets the guidelines, they have that assurance that they will be able to build what they have invested in and done all the studies on, and put their lives into. So that is also very important, and it will help us with our relationships with our home building community. Those are the most important points, I would say. I do appreciate the questions that you asked of Justine and David. That I appreciate the time staff has spent with us in advance of this meeting to make all of these points very clear. This is a significant body of work. We will be a community leader in the province by taking this on, and there will be checkpoints. So these are always working documents. But this is an important step for us to take, and I would very much appreciate council support, general committee support on these recommendations. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Purnell. I have Mayor Leal and Councillor Duguay.
Well, thanks very much, Mr. Chair. I look at this report and I boil this down to a simple equation. A plus B equals C. A being the accelerated municipal approval, B is the builder developers, and C equals construction of units. A plus B equals C. And why is this in the public interest? Well, we've had some chats this evening. Everybody defines public interest in certain ways. I define public interest of building to move a vacancy rate from 1.1% to an excess of 3%. Because we do know if that happens, when you're building units in the full housing continuum, you not only help people at the more expensive end of the housing market, but it also helps people experiencing homelessness. Every unit we build frees up another unit, and every unit you free up is a home for somebody else. The other reason why this is so important, by increasing our housing supply, it allows young people to make that Canadian dream, that ability to buy that home, move into a home, start a family, and move forward. And you can only achieve that in today's market by having a fairly robust inventory of building. Secondly, why this is very important strategic at this time. If you do a quick scan of communities across Canada that have recently received funding on the CMHC Housing Accelerator Fund, are those communities that have brought forward innovative policies and initiative within their housing sector. And one of the things we should do fairly quickly, assuming this gets approved this evening, is to notify at the provincial level Minister Calandra and at the federal level Minister Fraser to show that Peterborough wants to be on the forefront and bringing in new policy initiative to assist housing. The history of this is pretty interesting. Back in 2007, the minister of the day was an individual by the name of John Gerritsen. He was Ontario's Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing. But his background was that he was the longest serving mayor in the history of Kingston. And he knew as mayor that Kingston faced some extraordinary pressures from students coming to Queen's University and St. Lawrence College. So when he got the opportunity to become minister, he brought forward the original permit planning to expedite building permits right across the province of Ontario. And that is laid the foundation for us to go forward with this initiative this evening. I think, I appreciate why we want to do this on a pilot basis. It would be my druthers actually that we would move it on a citywide basis, just because of the housing circumstances that we certainly are faced here in Peterborough today. I want to thank staff. I want to thank the consultants for moving this forward. And if I was in the development industry in Peterborough today, any initiative that takes 7 planning steps, moves it to 4, cut out 3 planning steps. That makes housing will ultimately be less expensive in the community of Peterborough.
Thank you very much, Mayor Leal. Councillor Duguay.
Thank you, Chair Beamer. I'd like to first start by thanking Acting Commissioner Papadakos and Planning Director Brad Appleby. We had opportunity last week to meet for about an hour and a half, a very in-depth and productive conversation. I want to share with Council some examples of why this system makes sense. So we have entertained in these very chambers in the last 4 months several zoning applications. 3 come to mind. One, it was on Western Avenue. There was 1 person in the gallery, the planning consultant. Park Street South, a office taking advantage of a former financial institution. There was 1 person in the gallery, the planning consultant. The Catholic Education Center on Rubidge Street. There was 1 person in the gallery besides us. That was the planning consultant. These are examples from my perspective that would nicely fit into this system, because what happens, to Mayor Leal's point, that to have that public meeting, issue the public notice, staff time, agenda time, those are 3 of the steps that, based on this system, would become redundant. To Councillor Parnell's point, there will be, from my perspective, what I've observed from other communities, thresholds where this council would still reserve the right to make decisions on major redevelopment, major application. That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. I did, insofar as consultation, just as a cautionary note, and I did ask Mr. Appleby this directly, is there have been recent examples of official plans approved. For example, I'll speak to the county official plan. I would advise council that most county residents do not understand the county official plan necessarily and probably weren't actively consulted. And that's just a reality. The same could even be said by our own city official plan. Not 85,000, not every resident knows about our plan. However, we have an opportunity here to be very creative, because this is where planning really happens, at the regulatory context. So to Mr. Appleby, during this consultation process, is it possible, as this is unfolding, that we could receive a bit of an interim report to hear what you've learned during your consultation process?
Through the question, yes, at this moment, we have a blank slate in front of us, and we can and so touch points with council, I'm certain will be part of that. And, mapping out sort of various touch points with community and stakeholders, would be another element of that, but yes.
Similarly, if I might, Mr. Chairman, I do have both 3 other quick questions and comments. Could council members themselves shadow or attend some of these consultation sessions?
Through the chair, sure. Members of council are free to attend, sessions when they're held, for sure.
Thank you. I do support the phased approach, because frankly, the bulk of our community development applications will be happening and are happening along our major roads. They do not happen necessarily in the bowels of Kawartha Heights. There's where we end up often with minor variance applications, as an example. Meaning no offense to the councillors from Kawartha Heights. I also, whilst there's been an emphasis on housing, I think the process would encourage and foster growth beyond just housing, because our major strategic growth corridors are also areas where significant commercial and retail development could occur. Perhaps institutional growth could also occur. So, in summary, Mr. Chairman, I do support the phased approach. This is the reality. This is the evolving reality of planning in our province. The province has been telling us for some time this is coming. So I'm happy to hear we're on the forefront. I think that's important. And I do
just for council's benefit to bear in mind some of these small applications that have ended up here, and there's nobody in the council chambers but staff and ourselves. That's what this system would have the propensity of freeing up from our decision-making time. I'm also understand that, to Mayor Leal's point, that we send a strong message to our funders, to CMHC, the provincial and federal government, that we are serious, that we take the acceleration of housing and development very seriously. And this is yet another mechanism that we can implement to achieve that objective and send the strongest message possible to seniors level government. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Degay. Any further comments or questions? Seeing none, moved by Councillor Parnell. We'll take a vote. She asked first. Chair plan arrow. Can't win. And that is carried. Thanks, everyone. All right. We have 2 reports remaining. Responsibilities of Chief Administrative Officer. Councillor Riel.
Yeah, I'm going to move the no, it's the mayor's report, so he will be moving it.
I'll move it, Mr. Chair, just to start the discussion.
I spent the weekend pondering over this here, and the first thing that jumped out at me was that strong mayor's power. But the mayor beat me to the punch here. He sends an email to all of us that he's not going to use his strong mayor's power. So all the questions I had kind of went out the window. But it just happened that I was at an event on Saturday by CUPE, and they told me that the chief executive officer or the CEO had told him that he was going to combine some of the departments together. And they could tell by the look on my face that I didn't know anything about it. I think it's a courtesy that I think that we need to know what the plans are for the city of Peterborough. There's a cost for doing everything, and I have no problem trying to stymie somebody from doing their job, and certainly the zealous way that somebody goes about it. But I think that we need to be in part of that and know what the plan is for the city of Peterborough. I say that because I've gone through it several times with my former employment when changes were made, and there's always a cost associated with it. And the same thing here. I'm bullish on our CEO and the work he's doing. That was the only thing that I wanted to raise. I would like to be told if there's movements afoot and there's departments that are being put together. I would like to know about it because there's a cost associated with that. That's just my comment.
Thank you, Councillor Riel. CAO Reina.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for the comments. I just want to say that I did attend the meeting where all the unions were present, and my comment was that whatever changes which we have already done, I spoke about that. So I never told that, oh, there are further changes are coming at this time. So it was just a minor strategic alignments where you have heard that the Hawks and Rec has been merged. So nothing has changed for the people. And actually, there are more cost efficiencies. I did talk to them that these alignments are for their future, that the people can move horizontally, people can move vertically, instead of certain people doing garbage collection for next 20 years. Our focus is no, they should get more skill sets. They should be available and ready to work in other departments too for their career advancement. And of course, that's taking into consideration their contract agreements. So there are no major shuffles which will happen. All the changes which happened, the emails came to the council, and moving forward also, nothing will, there will be no surprises for anybody. And as a CEO, I believe in proper consultations and also talking to everybody, because this is both the future and again, I have mentioned so many times that we are the people who are just sitting behind the tables. It is about the true frontline leaders who are the brand ambassadors for the city. So thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you, Councillor Leal. Mayor Leal.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair, and I'd be remiss if I didn't recognize our new government relations person who's in the audience this evening, monitoring our first meeting at General Committee. I know we welcome Sarah McDougall, parent to our staff. Just wave, Sarah, please, joining our staff here in the city of Peterborough. Mr. Chair, people have reflected that I did send out a note this afternoon. For the last number of months, I've been talking to my peers across the province of Ontario, mayors that were given strong mayor powers early on, those that were given strong mayor powers in the second tranche that the province announced, and then the rest of the municipalities in Ontario. I've always felt that the most important hire that a city council makes is the hiring of a chief administrative officer. I fundamentally believe that hiring shouldn't rest with one individual, that indeed all members of council need to participate in hiring the chief administrative officer because all the other hirings flow from the original hiring of the chief administrative officer. That was the gist of what I said this afternoon, and I'm pleased that that's the process that we're going to follow here in the city of Peterborough.
Thank you, Mayor Leal. Any further comments or questions? Moved by Mayor Leal. We'll take a vote. And that is carried. Thank you. 14A2 inspection bylaw. Councillor Hakey.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Through you to Mr. Potts, I'm going to apologize, David, because I didn't read this. I didn't see this report. I was so caught up in the community planning permit. I didn't go beyond that page. So I do apologize for some of the questions. They're not intended to put you on the spot, and I don't believe that they will be. But what I would like to understand is the current process involved in getting onto somebody's property.
Mr. Chair, the bylaws that the city is currently to date, and that's part of the larger narrative about what the city has been doing in terms of municipal law enforcement, or more specifically not doing to date, has generally involved powers of entry, for example, in relation to a property standards bylaw. Property standards bylaw is passed and the powers of entry are statutorily established under the Building Code Act. Okay, so the Building Code Act deals with obviously the building code and that part of it, but the property standards provisions were also moved into the Building Code Act many years ago. In terms of zoning compliance, again, similar to the Building Code Act, for the municipal law enforcement that's been done in relation to the zoning bylaw, the powers of entry are statutorily established under the Planning Act. So, and what those statutes both have in common is a general power of entry onto property for purposes of an inspection, and then a carve out, anything that involves entry into any place or part of a building actually being used as a dwelling unit. There's a completely different set of rules. And the only way that a municipal law enforcement officer can gain access in those circumstances for purposes of an inspection is with the prior informed consent of an occupier, or alternatively pursuant to a search warrant issued by a justice of the peace on application, or in some circumstances pursuant to a court order. So that divide between dwelling units on the one hand and generally entering onto property, exterior places and places not used as a dwelling unit exists in those two statutes. And it won't be too long, Mr. Chair, but for context with respect to municipal act bylaws, all manner of municipal act bylaws, there's a few events that are relevant to the answer. Some members of council may recall that about 21 years ago, 20 years ago,
I can't remember what happened yesterday.
well, I remember, Mr. Chair. Many years ago, the old municipal act was completely repealed and replaced with what we still call the new municipal act. And fundamentally, what changed was in the old days, the municipal act was very large, and the context within which municipal jurisdiction was determined on a case-by-case basis was whether or not it was specifically written down in the municipal act. If it wasn't written down, the municipality didn't have the jurisdiction. And honestly, there was a paragraph within section 210 of the old municipal act that conferred on municipalities the power to pass bylaws to prevent spitting on the sidewalk. Okay, it was that prescriptive. Then with the new municipal act, 2001, chapter 25, the whole structure was turned on its head. So everything that was specifically prescribed before, almost all of it became much more generally established. So you may have heard it from time to time about municipal spheres of jurisdiction, right? Very broadly defined, basically conferring on municipal councils, and the Supreme Court of Canada referred to them as the level of government closest to the citizens that they serve. There was a case that went to the Supreme Court of Canada at the time. Other provinces were starting to establish these broadly defined powers. Ontario, frankly, followed suit. And so with that, coming to the point, is that among the very specifically prescribed powers, statutorily prescribed in the Municipal Act that was turned on its head with the new Municipal Act, was powers of entry. So under the old act, if there was a power of entry, it was very specifically prescribed, specific to the jurisdiction in question. But now with the new act, very broad jurisdiction to establish all manner of regulatory bylaws. So for example, with council's approval of IPS BD 23001, that's the approval that established the Municipal Law Enforcement Services Division and council's priorities. One of the specifically established priorities, as I recall, is a light pollution bylaw. There's reference in that report. That's an example. If we had the structure of the old municipal act, you would have hundreds of specifically prescribed powers of entry in the act. So what, and this is touched on in the report, what the new municipal act does is it prescribes, it generally defines that a municipality has the jurisdiction to pass bylaws to undertake various powers of entry for municipal act bylaws. And what I can tell you is what's set out in the bylaw, excuse me, follows exactly what's set out in the act. Section 436. What's set out in the bylaw also follows the exception for entry to dwelling units. So if it involves that, then you have to have the informed consent, apply for a search warrant, or get a court order. And lastly, for context, what is in front of council is, council may know I've acted for another municipality, and it's a version of a bylaw that I drafted 15 years ago for that other municipality. So this is about implementing powers that were introduced, and a new structure was introduced 20 years ago with respect to a more specific amendment to the act that happened in 2007. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, one more question, and I hope I don't regret asking this one. If I can. So that leads me to my question. So the amendment was in 2007. Why are we doing this now and not 15 years ago or however many? I can't do math that fast, but.
Mr. Chair, very relevant question, because Peterborough essentially has not been establishing or enforcing municipal act bylaws the way other municipalities have. That was the core of the report that I referred to before. Now that a division has been established, some of these standards that Peterborough has maybe fallen behind on, municipal act bylaws, lot maintenance, boulevard maintenance, light pollution, perhaps the noise bylaw needs to be revisited. They will all become more relevant. So this is a foundational piece for the approval that council gave in the past year.
Thank you. And if I can, one more, that explains a lot. There's a word that's used in this report that kind of leaves it open, which is used as the dwelling is relevant. How do we define relevant? When it's page 183, second paragraph, right at the bottom. However, if entry to a room or place actually used as a dwelling unit is relevant, who determines if it's relevant?
That is the part of the report that is intended to provide comfort, just to ensure that council understands that entry into a dwelling unit, that's governed by the statute. If there's a standard, a municipal act standard that council establishes, that at any particular circumstance would contemplate entry into any place used as a dwelling, then that's where section 437 applies, as does the bylaw requiring informed consent of an occupier, search warrant, or court order.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hagee. So I need a mover first. A mover, Councillor Bolden. I have Councillor Burke and Mayor Leal. Councillor Burke.
Thanks, Chair Beamer. I was really excited for Commissioner Potts to take off his lawyer hat, but then I guess I meant that in a lighthearted way. So I appreciate the tone of the conversation tonight. Throughout the whole meeting, it's been very productive, I feel, and I just wanted to thank Commissioner Potts for taking my call on the weekend and explaining some of the context to this. But I'm still, I guess, a little confused by the last 5 minutes. Would we still, as a municipality, would we still have to get that search warrant? What is the process that we would have to follow to enter someone's dwelling?
There's a process that one applies. It's established under the statute. One applies to the court for a search warrant. The process for applying for a search warrant, and I would suggest that in the context of municipal act bylaws of the variety that the city would be establishing, is probably going to be very, very rare, if ever. And that's actually mentioned in the report. That just comes from my own experience. But if ever it were relevant, then it's an application to the court. It's entertained by a justice of the peace based on a sworn affidavit.
So through the chair, that part wouldn't change. But does the process for the bylaw enforcement is it still a complaint-based process?
Mr. Chair, that's the whole process, but this is wearing the commissioner hat, not the legal hat. The process by which municipal law enforcement services will roll out the most efficient and effective means of achieving compliance, which is what council's direction to staff is under bylaw 20076. That may include, probably a substantial part of it will be in response to complaints. It's an efficient way of figuring out how to apply the resources, but it may involve, depending on the time of year, the circumstances, some proactive enforcement that doesn't wait for a complaint. I can tell you the staff are thinking about more modern deployment of technology for receiving and responding to complaints using processes other than the traditional court prosecution. But that will come to council throughout the next year.
Well, thank you. So through the chair, let's just say hypothetically, I made a bunch of complaints to say Councillor Riel is cooking pizzas out of his condo and he's not zoned to do that. Could that eventually lead to a search warrant and someone like breaking the door to get entrance and like taking a picture of the pizza oven?
Trying to think of a municipal act bylaw that to which that would apply, and I'm suggesting that's a hypothetical. I don't think really relates to, like, it wouldn't be the circumstance of breaking down a door in respect of a search warrant obtained for municipal act bylaw. I've never ever had that experience before. So
thanks. Thanks for just indulging me with that hypothetical. I guess the last question I had was when I was making some municipal comparators. I noticed that Waterloo had quite a substantial part about compensation and damages, and it spoke to some of the effects about the liability of. Is that spoken to somewhere else that I'm not seeing in ours? our bylaw?
The last section of the proposed bylaw implements a similar level of indemnity that's established by section 448 of the Municipal Act. So it's based on that.
All right, thanks. I think that for me, that there's nothing that, I don't mean this in a disrespectful way. I'm not going to challenge the knowledge and expertise of the staff, but I don't think that this is something that I'm going to support. I'm worried about the optics of it. I don't think that it's what the public interest is asking for. And I'm not just saying that from my experience. I'm saying that from the data that we have as a city in some of the budget consultation that's been done. It really places this kind of thing at the bottom of the list of the priorities for the city. And so for that reason and no other, this is not something I'm gonna support right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Burke. All right, ladies and gentlemen, one thing we do ask is no clapping or booing in the audience. So one thing you can do to show your appreciation or your support is just wave your hands. We will see it. We won't hear it, but we'll see it. So so a lot of hands being waved. So thank you for that. Okay, we'll try to speak a little louder. As far as I know, everything is on, but they're not. Okay, we'll look into that. About committee members, if we can just speak a little bit louder. So Mayor Leal.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of questions to Commissioner Potts. Commissioner, has there ever been a charter challenge to powers of entry in Canada based on municipal bylaws?
Your Worship, I'm not, Mr. Chair, sorry. There have been all manner of charter challenges to municipal bylaws over the years. I can't off the top think of one that relates to the implementation of the section 436 inspection bylaw per se, like the passing of the bylaw. It is possible to breach the charter with respect to the way in which delegated power is exercised. But in terms of the bylaw itself, I'm not aware of any such challenge.
My second question, Mr. Chair, is to Brendan Wedley. There may be people concerned that this bylaw is, to use a term now, overreach of government. So in terms of our website, Mr. Wedley, will there be an ability, based on the information provided by Commissioner Potts, to explain what this bylaw is all about and the limits to this bylaw?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, we will endeavor to work with legal services to post that information and to push the information out to residents. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mayor Leal. Any further comments or questions? Moved by Councillor Baldwin. We'll take a vote. And that is carried. All right, committee members. So we do have a notice of motion. So Councillor Lachika, the floor is yours for your notice of motion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And if I may, I have just a few remarks by way of introduction to the motion before I read it. I wanted to share a couple of very recent reports from this weekend's Examiner. They're challenging and they're hard, so just that warning to you. On Saturday night, a 34-year-old woman, Latoya Anderson, was found dead in her home in Whitby, just a stone's throw away from here. Officers went to her home and found Anderson not breathing and took the 33-year-old man that was there into custody. He's been charged with second-degree murder. We were also reminded in the Examiner, the same Examiner, and our hearts go out to the family, to the friends, and to the community at Curve Lake First Nation who are still awaiting justice for Selena Taylor. At that time, Indigenous leaders called out fervently for a charge of homicide in her tragic assault and subsequent death in 2021. At the perpetrator's latest appearance this past May, the Crown Attorney has still not yet upgraded the charges from aggravated assault and assault causing bodily harm. Violence continues and time marches on. And we know now, and this is as of 2022 statistics, that 44% of women, or 6.2 million women aged 15 and older, have reported some kind of abuse in their intimate partner relationship. And every 6 days, a woman in Canada is murdered by her intimate partner. It costs $7.4 billion to deal with the aftermath of intimate partner violence. And this is from the Department of Justice of Canada. Women are 4 times more likely to be afraid of their partners compared to men or experience intimate partner violence. And there are elevated risks of violence for women who may identify with disabilities, who are Indigenous, who are visible minorities, etc. This is an issue. And a declaration of an epidemic, a powerful symbol, a powerful mechanism is put into play for action. And it uses the public health framework to help survivors and to bring attention to the issue as a sociological phenomenon. And it calls upon governments, both provincial and federal levels of government, to collaborate and implement urgently policies that would ensure support in multiple areas to aid survivors. This could be through the legal system, mandatory sexual health education, upgraded immigration policies, upgraded workplace safety and affordable housing. So these are things that we can do now. And we have an opportunity today. It's November, and it's actually Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So it's timely. It's important. And I encourage, and I know that there are those around the table who support this, and I've spoken to community members and leaders of organizations who support this across Peterborough, and more than 30 municipalities have already made this pledge via motion. So we are a leader in Peterborough, and we can do this tonight. And I'd like to read the motion, if I could. Whereas intimate partner violence, IPV, also known as domestic violence, is a prevalent form of gender-based violence, and whereas Carol Colton, Anastasia Kuzik, and Natalie Warmerdam, 3 women from Renfrew County, were killed by their former partner on the morning of September 22nd, 2015. And whereas the resulting coroner's inquest verdict included 86 recommendations, the first of which was for the province of Ontario to formally declare IPV as an epidemic. And whereas the Mass Casualty Commission was established by the Government of Canada and province of Nova Scotia to conduct an independent public inquiry into the mass casualty that occurred in Nova Scotia on April 18th and 19th, 2020, resulting in the death of 22 people, including 1 person who is pregnant. And whereas the commissioners emphasized that one of the most important lessons from the Nova Scotia mass casualty is the need to urgently prioritize preventing and ending gender-based violence and family violence. And as the 130 recommendations from the commissioner's report include adopting a public health approach to preventing mass casualty incidents and mobilizing a society-wide response. And by declaring gender-based violence, intimate partner violence, and family violence to be an epidemic that warrants a meaningful and sustained society-wide response. And whereas specific legislation on family and domestic violence has been passed by 6 provinces and 3 territories, not including Ontario. And whereas over 30 municipalities have passed a resolution to declare IPV an epidemic, and more are in the process. And whereas the city of Peterborough has formally acknowledged housing and homelessness, mental health and addiction, substance misuse as key areas of priority in its community and safety well-being plan. Therefore, be it resolved that the City of Peterborough declare intimate partner violence an epidemic, and that the recommendations from the Renfrew County Coroner's Inquest be referred to staff for consideration and, where appropriate, integrate within the City of Peterborough's Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan, and that a copy of this motion be sent to the Honourable Doug Ford, Premier of Ontario, the Honourable Sylvia Jones, MPP, Minister of Health, and Dave Smith, MPP for Peterborough Kawartha. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor LaChica. Comments or questions to the notice of motion, Councillor Hakey?
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. For those of you that know me, I do not normally support sending letters off to the governments. I don't believe that this is our fight to do, but certainly to recognize. As a father of 3 young women, I am well aware of what happens or what can happen, and it does concern me. I've spoken to Councillor LaChica about this, and this isn't really a cost issue, but I wanted to understand that there wasn't any direct implications at our level for implementing, if we do implement it into the community well-being plan. But it is something that we all know about. It's something that thankfully we're starting to talk about now publicly, because it is something that affects a lot of the young women and other women too. So for me, it's something I do support, and it bothers me that Ontario hasn't taken a formal stand yet. Now maybe they have, and in all fairness, I have not spoken with MPP Smith to see if there's something in the works, but this is something I do support.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Hakey. Mayor Leal?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I want to really thank Councillor Chica for bringing this forward. And it reminds me, one of the toughest zoning battles I was ever involved with my council colleague of the day, Glenn Padgett, is when we approved zoning on Stenson Boulevard to provide housing for women fleeing domestic violence. It was some of the most heated public meetings I was ever involved with, because the neighborhood was adamantly opposed to doing it. So when you fast forward 20 years to see how that housing is integrated superbly with that broader neighborhood, certainly indicates that we have made some progress. And in fact, many of the women that found homes there fleeing domestic violence certainly worked. The neighbors there ultimately took them in, helped them, and it's been a real success story. But it was a heated zoning application that went on for many months through a whole series of public meetings.
Thank you very much, Mayor Leal. Any further comments or questions? All right, moved by Councillor LaChica. We'll take a vote and e-scribe. And that is carried. Other business? Seeing none, motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Crowley. We'll take a vote, and committee members will need 3 minutes to switch over to special council, but just 3 minutes. Another meeting. Just 3 minutes to switch over. Adjournment. Yeah, 3 minutes. Council should be very quick, so just a 3-minute break. Thank you, everyone. We'll reconvene in 3 minutes.